There is a photograph that survives the end of the world. A man in a sweater vest, his arm around a woman who is laughing, and if you did not know what came next, you would think it was the happiest picture ever taken. The man is Simon Petrikov, and by the time you meet him, he will not remember her name, or his own, or that he was ever kind. That is the thing about Adventure Time. Almost nobody tells you when they hand it to you as a children's cartoon. Underneath the candy people and the talking dog, it is one of the saddest, strangest, most carefully built worlds ever put on a screen, and most of it is buried in corners the series never stops to explain. Tonight we are going through all of it, slowly, from the war that ended the old world to the two kids who inherit the new one 1,000 years later. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let me start where the world starts, which is with the world ending. The single most important fact in Adventure Time is one the series hides in plain sight for years and only slowly lets you understand, and it changes everything you thought you were watching. The Land of Ooo, the place with the Candy Kingdom and the Treehouse and the Ice King, is not a fantasy world at all. It is Earth, our actual planet, roughly 1,000 years after a catastrophic war wiped out almost everything. Pendleton Ward, the creator, has confirmed as much. Ooo is the future, and the fields Finn and Jake run through are grown over the bones of a civilization that looked a great deal like ours. The war has a name, and the name is deliberately soft and childish and horrible all at once. The Great Mushroom War. On the surface that sounds like something out of a picture book. Mushrooms, cute. But the mushroom the name refers to is the mushroom cloud, the shape a nuclear detonation makes when it rises off the ground, and once you know that, the whimsy curdles into something else. Across scattered flashbacks and background details, the series tells you this was an apparently nuclear conflict, human against human, that flattened cities and salted the planet with radiation and something stranger than radiation, because when the bombs came down, they did not only kill, they changed things. The piece I find hard to shake is this. The war is what put the magic back into the world. Before the Mushroom War, this version of Earth was a place a lot like ours. Recognizable, ordinary, no talking animals, no elemental princesses, no floating wizards. The bombs are what broke that open. Everything the series shows you of the aftermath implies that the detonation of the Doomsday weapon flooded the planet with a kind of raw, magical energy. And that energy is what mutated the survivors and the animals and the very ground into the creatures and kingdoms you spend the series with. So the candy people, the talking dog, the vampires, all of it is downstream of the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. Ooo is not an escape from our world. Ooo is what grows out of its grave. There is one weapon the series keeps circling, and it is worth slowing down on, because it is the hinge the whole cosmology turns on. It is usually called the mushroom bomb, and it was not an ordinary bomb even by the standards of a nuclear war. It was a mutagenic doomsday device, and when it detonated over a major city, the flashbacks show its cloud full of green, howling faces, screaming shapes pouring up into the sky, and a person standing near the blast, an ordinary human caught in that moment, was warped by it into something that should not exist. That is the birth of the Lich, the embodiment of death and extinction that stalks the entire series. We will come back to him properly later, because he deserves it. For now, I only want you to hold on to the shape of it. The most evil thing in the Land of Ooo was not summoned by a wizard or born in some dark dimension. It was made by us, by the same weapon we used to end ourselves, in the last seconds of the old world. So Ooo is a graveyard that learned to sing, and the more you look, the more the world rewards you for looking. There are ruined cars half sunk in hillsides. There are the shells of skyscrapers standing in the ocean. There is a whole recurring visual language of our stuff, televisions, refrigerators, video game consoles, gas station signs, all of it repurposed by the survivors and their descendants, worn smooth by 1,000 years, and treated as ancient relics whose original purpose nobody remembers. Prismo, the little game console who is one of Finn and Jake's closest friends, is arguably the best-loved piece of pre-war human technology still running. The Ice King's whole aesthetic, the Candy Kingdom's architecture, the treehouse, they are all built in and around the debris of the 21st century. Once you are attuned to it, you cannot stop seeing it. Adventure Time is set in a museum of us, and the exhibits have started talking. Now, I want to be honest about the parts that are not settled, because this is where fans argue and the writers are deliberately coy. Where exactly is Ooo? What part of the real Earth are we looking at? And here the answer blurs. There is a giant crater that appears in a couple of episodes, an enormous gouge taken out of the planet, and some of the lore reads that crater as covering what used to be Europe, as if a continent had simply been scooped away. But the maps also keep suggesting Eastern North America, roughly where the bomb is implied to have fallen. Even the scale is disputed among the people who made it. Pendleton Ward described Ooo as a continent. The showrunner who followed him, Adam Muto, has said he pictured it as closer to the size of a small island nation. So if you have ever seen a confident fan map claiming to show exactly where the Candy Kingdom sits on a real globe, take it gently. The creators left it soft on purpose, and that softness is part of the spell. Ooo is our world, changed past the point of certainty, meant to feel like a place you almost recognize and never quite can. What gets me about all of this is the tone Adventure Time chooses to tell it in. A different cartoon would have made the post-apocalypse grim and gray and self-serious, all ash and misery. This one does the opposite. It makes the ruins bright. It fills the graveyard with color and jokes and real joy, and it lets the sadness sit underneath, patient, waiting for you to grow up enough to notice it. The children watching see an adventure. The adults watching, and the children once they have become adults, see a long, tender elegy for a world that destroyed itself, told from the perspective of the small, strange, happy things that came after. And almost nobody talks about how radical that is. Here is a show that opens on the literal aftermath of the apocalypse and decides the correct response is to be kind about it. That is the ground everything else grows out of, so keep it under you as we go. Every character you are about to meet is standing on the same buried world. The Ice King is standing on it. Marceline is standing on it, and she is old enough to actually remember it. Princess Bubblegum was born out of it. Finn is, as far as anyone knew for most of the series, one of the last human beings left alive on a planet that used to have billions. And that is where we go next. Into the tragedy the story buries deepest of all. The man in the photograph, the crown that took his mind, and the little girl he tried to save. So let us go back to the man in the photograph, because his is the story the series handles with the greatest care, and the one that turns a lot of adults into a puddle the first time they understand it. His name is Simon Petrikov. Before the war he was, by every account we are given, a good and gentle man, an antiquarian and archaeologist, someone whose whole life was the study of old and beautiful things. He was engaged to be married to a woman named Betty, and we see enough of them together to know that they were happy, ordinary, in love in the uncomplicated way that people are before anything has gone wrong. And then, on one of his expeditions, Simon bought a crown. The details of the purchase are kept deliberately loose across the flashbacks and tie-in material. An old crown, acquired far to the north, from a seller who was more than happy to be rid of it, which, in a story like this, should always be a warning. Simon brought it home the way you would bring home any curiosity, and to make Betty laugh, he put it on. That is the whole hinge of the tragedy, and it is unbearable precisely because it is so small. He did not seek power. He did not covet the thing. He put on an old hat to be silly for the woman he loved, and the crown woke up. It flooded his mind with visions. It made ice pour out of him, and in that first fit it changed him so completely and so frighteningly that it drove Betty away. She fled, and the version of Simon she loved essentially never came back. The crown itself is canon, laid out across several episodes. It grants its wearer power over ice and snow, and it grants something close to immortality, which is the reason Simon is still alive 1,000 years after everyone he knew is dust. But it takes a price for both, and the price is his mind. The crown eats memory. It eats identity. The longer he wears it, the more of Simon it burns away and replaces with something colder and stranger, until the kind archaeologist is gone, and what is left is the babbling, lonely, princess-obsessed figure you meet in the first episodes and, for a long time, laugh at. Because that is the cruel trick the series plays on you, and I think it is one of the bravest things it ever did. It introduces the Ice King as comic relief, a pathetic, incompetent villain who kidnaps princesses and whines and gets punched, and you laugh, and then over years of watching it walks you back to the truth. The joke was a dying man. You were laughing at the last, worst symptom of the worst thing that ever happened to a good person. And it gets worse, or maybe deeper is the better word, when you learn what he did with his immortality in the years right after the war. Because Simon, still human enough to try, found a child. A small girl, alone in the ruins of the ended world. And he took care of her. He kept her fed and kept her safe, and he gave her a stuffed toy, a little bear, to hold on to. That girl was Marceline. The one the series will later make into a rock and roll vampire queen 1,000 years old was, once, a frightened kid being looked after by the man who would become the Ice King. And the reason he left her, the reason he walked away from the one good thing he had left, is the crown. He could feel it taking him. He could feel himself becoming something that might not be safe for her to be near. So he left before he could hurt her, and in leaving he lost the only family either of them had. There is a song for this, sung much later, and I will not try to quote it exactly because I want to get it right. But the emotional core of it is Marceline, grown, singing back to a Simon who no longer remembers her, telling him she remembers, telling him she still loves him, asking him not to forget her, even though forgetting is the one thing the crown guarantees he will do. For a lot of people, it is the most devastating scene in the entire series, and it sits inside a show, nominally about a boy and his dog hitting monsters with a sword. I want to be careful to separate what the story states from what it implies here, because the register matters. What is stated, flatly, as fact, is this. Simon existed before the war. The crown gave him ice powers and long life and destroyed his mind. He cared for young Marceline and left her. He is one of the very few humans to survive the Mushroom War, kept alive by the same curse that unmade him. All of that is canon, shown on screen. What it implies, and this is the interpretation the whole arc is built to make you feel, is that immortality without your memories is not a gift at all, but the loneliest possible sentence. That to live forever while forgetting everyone you loved is a kind of death that never finishes. Nobody puts that in a sentence. You arrive at it yourself, slowly, the way you arrive at true things. There is a load-bearing rule tucked inside all of this that I want to make explicit, because fans and casual viewers get it wrong constantly. Simon and the Ice King are not two people. There is a strong temptation to treat them as a good man trapped inside an evil one, a soul and a possessing demon, but that is not quite what is happening. They are one being at different stages of the same illness. The crown does not replace Simon with a separate person. It corrodes Simon into the Ice King the way a disease corrodes a mind, gradually, cruelly, with lucid moments in between that make it worse rather than better. When the story wants to give you the horror of it, it does not show you a monster. It shows you Simon, briefly himself again, understanding exactly what is happening to him and unable to stop it, and then losing the thread mid-sentence and slipping back under. That is the real face of the Ice King, not a kidnapper of princesses. A man drowning very slowly, in public, for 1,000 years, while everyone around him treats it as a nuisance. Now, does the story ever let him out? This is where the timeline needs care, so let me keep it clean. Across the series, there are moments where the curse is temporarily lifted, and they are used like held breaths. There is an arc involving an anti-magic being, a creature whose very presence cancels all magic in the area, and when that being is active, it strips the crown of its power, and, for a short and precious window, Simon comes back. He is himself. He remembers. And you watch him get to be a whole person again for the length of an episode before the magic returns and takes him under one more time. It is not cruel for its own sake, though. These moments are planted so that the ending can pay them off. Without spoiling the finale before we get there properly, I will just say that Simon's story is one of the few in the series that receives something like mercy, and when it comes, it is earned by every laugh you were tricked into at his expense. There is a small, quiet piece of this I love, and almost nobody brings it up. The reason Simon is so obsessed with princesses as the Ice King is not random. The crown, working through the wreckage of his memory, keeps reaching for Betty. He called her his princess. The kidnapping, the fixation, the desperate lonely need for a princess to love him. It is the crown's garbled misremembering of the one thing Simon could not fully let go of, even as he lost everything else. So every time the Ice King does something ridiculous and villainous with a princess, you are watching the corrupted echo of a man trying to find his fiancée through 1,000 years of static. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it, and the comedy never lands the same way again. That is Simon. Hold on to him, because his story and Marceline's are two halves of the same wound, and she is the one we turn to now. Marceline Abadeer is 1,000 years old, give or take, and I think the series wants you to feel every year of that number as weight, rather than as a fun fact. Because being old in Adventure Time is not glamorous. It means you were there for the worst of it. It means you remember the world before the fantasy grew over it, and you have watched everyone soft and mortal that you ever loved either die or change past knowing. Marceline is, in a lot of ways, the story's memory. She is the character who connects the ruined past to the bright present, and she carries that connection like a bruise she has learned to live around. Let me lay out what she actually is, because it is stranger than it first looks. Marceline is a hybrid. Her father is Simon Abadeer, the Lord of the Nightosphere, which is the series version of a hell, a dimension where souls are held and consumed, and Simon rules it as something close to a devil. Her mother, Elise, was a human woman, so Marceline is half demon and half human by birth, and then, later in her life, she becomes a vampire on top of that. It is a lot of supernatural heritage stacked into one person, and the writing is smart enough to know that the interesting part is not the powers. The interesting part is that a demon-human hybrid still just wanted her mom, and still just wanted her dad to show up. The earliest we see her ties directly back to where we just were. As a small child, right around the time of the Mushroom War, Marceline survived the apocalypse sheltering with her mother Elise in the wreckage of the old world, the two of them taking cover inside the shell of an old van as the sky came apart. Elise, over time, grew sick, and the strong implication is that the sickness came from the radiation and the mutagenic fallout of the war, the same poison in the air that was remaking the whole planet. So one of the first things you can say about Marceline's life is that the war took her mother, slowly, the way it took so much else. And into that gap steps Simon. This is the overlap I mentioned. The little girl Simon cared for after the war is this child. The bear he gave her, the one called Hambo, is this bear. For a stretch of time in the broken years right after the end of everything, a dying man losing his mind and a half-demon little girl losing her mother were the only family each other had, and then the crown took him and he left, and she was alone again. That bear matters more than a stuffed animal has any right to, so let me stay with it. Hambo is not just sentimental. In Adventure Time, love can be a literal power source, and objects saturated with real love carry magical weight. There is a witch, Maja the Sky Witch, who at one point steals Hambo specifically because she can sense that it is soaked in enough love to fuel serious magic. Think about what that means. The bear a broken man gave to a frightened child in the ruins of the world holds so much love that a witch will scheme to weaponize it. That is the series telling you, in its sideways way, that the bond between Simon and Marceline is one of the strongest forces it has. Measurable, usable, real. And it is also a setup for loss, because Hambo does eventually get destroyed, and Marceline having to let go of the last object connecting her to that time is one more grief layered onto a life already made of them. Now the vampire part, because it is one of the best pieces of world building in the series, and the writers waited years to explain it. Marceline is not a vampire because she was born one. She became one, and the how is revealed in a miniseries called Stakes, which aired late in the run, in the 7th season, across several nights. Here is the reveal, and it recontextualizes her whole character. In her teenage years, after the war, in a world where a handful of humans were clinging to survival, Marceline was a vampire hunter. She hunted them to protect the surviving humans, and her powers, the ones you take for granted watching her float and shapeshift and turn invisible and heal, are not innate gifts. She absorbed them. Each vampire she killed, she took something from. One power at a time. Flight from one, transformation from another, invisibility, healing, on down the line. And the last vampire she faced, the Vampire King, bit her before she finished him, and that bite passed the curse into her and made her a true vampire. So Marceline the Vampire Queen is, at her root, a human girl who became the thing she hunted in the act of protecting people from it. The powers you think of as who she is are trophies from a war she fought to keep the last humans alive. Stakes does something painful and clever with this. Marceline, by that late point, does not want to be a vampire anymore. She is tired of it. And Princess Bubblegum, being a scientist, devises a way to cure her, to draw the vampire essence out and let Marceline be mortal, ordinary, finite. And it works. For a little while Marceline gets to be human, but the cure has a catch, because the cure always has a catch. Pulling the vampire essence out of her releases the 5 ancient vampires she had absorbed, the Empress, the Moon, the Fool, the Hierophant, and the Vampire King. back into the world as physical beings, and Marceline, mortal now and far weaker, has to hunt them all over again. By the end, she reabsorbs them and becomes a vampire once more. Powers restored, curse restored, which reads, on interpretation, as the story saying something hard about identity. You cannot simply subtract the terrible things that happen to you and keep everything else. The powers and the pain came in together. To be free of the curse, she would have to be free of the strength, and the world will not let her keep only the good half. I said Hunson was mostly absent, and that absence is its own long thread. The ruler of the Nightosphere is the kind of father who is always away on business, and in his case, the business is running a soul-devouring hell dimension, which does not make him easier to forgive. The famous version of their conflict is an early episode where Hunson comes to the surface world, and Marceline's fury at him turns out to be, underneath the demon theatrics, the very human resentment of a kid whose dad never showed up and then ate her fries. That is not a metaphor I am reaching for. The literal emotional climax involves fries, and it plays that for comedy and then lets the comedy break your heart, because the fries are standing in for every small thing a distant parent fails to notice. We will come back to Hunson and the Nightosphere and the amulet that makes him what he is, because that is a whole piece of cosmology on its own. For now, I just want Marceline's father to sit next to Marceline's lost mother and Marceline's lost Simon. 3 absences, one for each part of what she is. Human and demon and the family she chose. What I love about Marceline, and what I think the writers are proudest of in her, is that 1,000 years of loss did not make her cruel. It made her guarded, it made her sharp, it gave her a music that is equal parts anger and tenderness, but the core of her is loyalty. She spends the series slowly letting people back in, and the 2 she lets in deepest are Simon, whom she never stops loving even when he cannot remember her, and Bubblegum, whom she loves in a way the show takes its entire run to be brave enough to say out loud. And that is the door we walk through next, because Princess Bubblegum is not what you think she is either. She is not a person the way Marceline is a person. She is closer to a force of nature wearing a crown, and her origin is one of the strangest and most quietly unsettling things in the whole Land of Ooo. Princess Bubblegum, Bonable, the pink monarch of the Candy Kingdom, is usually filed away as the smart one, the scientist, the responsible adult of the group, and she is all of that. But underneath the lab coat and the crown, there is something the series only lets you fully understand late, and it reframes her from a person into something much closer to a living element of the planet. Because Bubblegum was not born, she was formed. Here is the origin, and it turns eerie once you slow down on it. In the centuries after the Mushroom War, as the magic settled into the land and life started remaking itself, there was a mass of pink biomass, a huge living deposit of candy substance the writers call the Mother Gum. It was alive in the way a field or a colony is alive, spread out, patient, ancient. And out of that Mother Gum, gestated over a very long time and then, in effect, blasted out into the world, came 2 beings. One was Bonibel, the future Princess Bubblegum. The other was her brother Nettie. This is shown to you in a flashback, and the image of Bubblegum and Nettie emerging out of the gum, formed rather than born, is one of those Adventure Time details that is presented gently and is quietly horrifying when you think about it. The nurturing ruler of the Candy Kingdom is a piece of the world that stood up and decided to be a person. She is, in the cosmology of Ooo, the living incarnation of the Candy Elemental, one of the 4 fundamental elemental forces we will get to properly, and every Candy citizen she rules over is, in a sense, made of the same stuff she is. The dates here are soft, and the writers want them soft, so I will keep them loose. The Mother Gum is described as forming and gestating her something on the order of 1,000 years ago, with her actual emergence into the world put at roughly 800 years before the events of the series. Do not hold me or the canon to the exact figure, because these ages drift a little between episodes, which is honestly how ancient beings would remember their own age anyway. The point that matters is the scale. Bubblegum is not a young woman who happens to be clever. She is centuries old, older than almost every kingdom on the map, and she has been ruling and scheming and building for a very, very long time. Now here is the part I find most revealing about who she is, and it is a piece of backstory that doubles as a warning about her whole character. Bonibel, when she was young, was lonely. And rather than sit in that loneliness, she did what she always does, which is that she solved it, with candy and with will. She used the candy biomass to create her own family. She made an uncle, GOLB. She made an aunt, Lolly. She made a cousin, Chicle. She built herself relatives out of the same material she is made of. And this tells you something essential about Bubblegum that the series returns to again and again. When she is faced with a problem, even a problem of the heart, her instinct is to engineer a solution and to control the result. She did not find a family. She manufactured one, on her terms, with herself at the center. And it went wrong, because engineered people have wills of their own. GOLB and the others resented being created and bossed around by a little girl, even a little girl who was, technically, their maker and their elder. GOLB in particular turned against her, and he cooked up a scheme to strip her of the thing that made her dangerous, her mind. He developed something called dum-dum juice, a serum that reduces a candy person to a mindless, docile state, and he intended to dose Bubblegum with it and turn her into just another obedient candy citizen. It did not go to plan. In the chaos, the serum ended up transforming the conspirators instead. Lolly and Chicle were caught by it, and GOLB himself was hit and reduced. They were remade into new forms, harmless background figures in the Candy Kingdom, their old selves buried. For years they lived on as those diminished versions, and Bubblegum ruled without ever fully reckoning with what she had done to the family she built and then broke. That reckoning is what the finale is partly about, and we will get there. But I want to name the through line now because it is the key to reading her. Bubblegum's great flaw and her great strength are the same thing. She controls. She builds people and systems and cures and weapons because she believes, deep down, that a problem understood is a problem she can fix, and that includes people. It makes her a brilliant leader and an unnerving one. She has done cold things in the name of keeping her kingdom safe: surveillance, manipulation, the occasional quiet ruthlessness, and the series does not flinch from it. She is not a villain, but she is the character most likely to do a frightening thing for a defensible reason. And the great softening of her arc, the thing that saves her from becoming the tyrant she could be, is Marceline. Because Marceline is the one person Bubblegum cannot control, cannot engineer, cannot solve. She can only love her, on Marceline's terms, and learning to do that, learning to let one relationship exist that she does not run, is the closest thing Bubblegum has to growth across the series. There is a smaller experiment of hers that deserves its own moment, because it is the funniest and saddest example of her create-a-solution instinct, and that is the Earl of Lemongrab. In her Candy Life experiments, Bubblegum tried to make a person, and Lemongrab was one of her early failures. He came out wrong, too sour, unstable, screaming from the moment of his creation, and rather than deal with him, she exiled him to his own distant earldom to be somebody else's problem, which is a deeply Bubblegum way to handle a mistake. And then, feeling guilty about how lonely he was out there, she did the only thing she knows how to do. She made him another one. She created a second Lemongrab so the first would have company, and for a moment it worked. They bonded, and then it decayed into something disturbing. Because in a later episode you learn that the original Lemongrab, driven by hunger and loneliness and his own broken wiring, has partly eaten the second one, and rules his lemon citizens as a tyrant who keeps them in line with electric shocks. Later still, a third Lemongrab is made from the remains. It is played as grotesque comedy, and it is, but read it straight, and it is a parable about Bubblegum's whole method. She makes life to fix a feeling, and the life she makes has to live with whatever she got wrong. Lemongrab is what happens when a lonely god is careless. And nobody in the Candy Kingdom is entirely unmarked by the fact that their ruler can, and does, simply make more of them when she needs to. So when you watch Bubblegum be kind, remember that her kindness is a choice made by something with the power to be otherwise. She is a piece of the planet that woke up, taught herself science, built a nation out of dessert, manufactured a family, broke it, and spent centuries learning, slowly and incompletely, that some things should not be controlled. That is a far stranger and richer character than the smart princess she looks like from the outside. And the framework that explains what she fundamentally is, the elemental system that makes her the living candy, is the next thing we need, because it is the hidden skeleton under a huge amount of the magic. The elementals are one of those pieces of Adventure Time lore that reorganize the whole map once you understand them, and they are held back until deep into the run, in a 9th season miniseries simply called Elements. Here is the idea. Underneath everything in Ooo, there are 4 fundamental forces. 4 eternal embodiments that have existed since life first appeared on Earth. Candy, fire, ice, slime. They are not gods exactly, and not people exactly. They are principles that walk around wearing a person, and there is always exactly one of each at any given time. When one dies, the element does not die with them. It reincarnates, finds a new host, and continues. So, the candy elemental has always existed and always will. But the specific being carrying it changes down the ages. Right now, in the present, the candy elemental is Princess Bubblegum, which is why she is made of the same substance as her subjects, and why her connection to candy runs deeper than mere rulership. The 4 elements are tied, loosely, to the 4 classical humors. The old idea that a personality is a balance of temperaments. Candy is the sanguine one, warmth and sweetness and sociability. Ice is the melancholic one, sadness and cold and isolation, which lands hard when you remember who wears the ice in the present. Fire is the choleric one, anger and heat and drive. Slime is the phlegmatic one, calm, sluggish, easygoing. I love that the writers reached back to a medieval theory of the body to structure their elemental magic, because it means the elements are not just powers, they are moods, they are ways of being a person, and a world tilted too far into any one of them becomes a nightmare version of that temperament, which is exactly what the Elements miniseries shows you. Let me walk the history of the Ice line specifically, because it connects 3 characters you would never guess were connected. Long before the war, back in the age of the dinosaurs, the Ice Elemental was a being named Urgence Evergreen. An evergreen story, told in a standalone episode, is where the crown that anchors everything is actually invented. There was a comet coming to strike the Earth, and Evergreen, wanting to save his world, set out to create a magical crown, a wish-granting crown, so that he could wish the comet away. He built it, and through a chain of accident, the wish did not go to Evergreen. His little assistant, a penguin-like creature, ended up as the one who made a wish on the crown at the crucial moment, and the wish that came out was not the grand salvation Evergreen intended. It is a small, strange, funny, devastating scene, and the reason it matters is that this crown, Evergreen's crown, is the same crown, down the long ages, that Simon Petrikov will one day buy and put on to make Betty laugh. The thing that destroyed Simon's mind was forged by an ice elemental to stop the end of the world. That is the kind of deep connective tissue Adventure Time buries and never underlines. The next ice elemental worth knowing is Patience St. Pim, and she is the engine of the Elements miniseries. Patience was an ice elemental who lived in an age before the Mushroom War, and she foresaw a catastrophe coming, the war itself, most likely. Rather than die in it, she froze herself in ice to sleep through the disaster and wake up on the other side, which she eventually does, arriving in the present as a relic of a lost age with an agenda. Her plan is to awaken the other elementals to their true nature and, in her mind, restore the world to a purer elemental state. And this is where you learn something crucial about Bubblegum. Patience reveals that Bubblegum, as the candy elemental, has powers she has never fully tapped, an elemental identity underneath the scientist. The same is true of the Slime Princess, who did not know she was the slime elemental. The fire elemental, Flame Princess, is the exception, because she has had her powers since childhood and always knew what she was. When Patience activates the elements, Ooo tips over into a fever dream, and this is the payoff of tying the elements to temperaments. Bubblegum's candy power overwhelms her and psychically links her to every candy person in the land, and the whole kingdom becomes a syrupy, saccharine, forcibly happy nightmare, sweetness with no consent in it, which is an unsettling thing to watch. Each element, unchecked, warps its region into an extreme version of its mood. To fix it, Finn and Jake have to gather the 4 elemental gems and, in effect, rebalance the world, pull it back from any single element's dominion. The lesson buried in it, on interpretation, is that no single temperament should rule a whole world, that a place made entirely of sweetness, or entirely of rage, or entirely of cold, is a place where nobody is really free. Balance is not a compromise here. Balance is survival. There is a detail in the Elements arc I have to flag, because it is one of the series' rare uses of real horror aimed at its main characters, and it stays with people. During the crisis, to survive being turned into a candy person himself, Finn is protected by an unusual means, and Jake is transformed. I do not want to overstate specifics I cannot verify precisely, so I will keep to what the arc clearly does, which is put our heroes in real danger of losing themselves to an element and having to claw back to who they are. The elemental system is not just a power set, it is a way of asking what a person is underneath their nature. If Bubblegum stopped fighting her candy nature, would there be any Bonnable left, or just candy wearing her face? That is the question the miniseries leaves hanging, and it never fully answers it, which is the right call. So hold the 4 of them in your head as a load-bearing rule, because it explains a lot of otherwise loose ends. There are always 4 elementals: fire, ice, candy, slime. They cannot be permanently wiped out as a category, because the element simply reincarnates. Bubblegum is candy, whether or not she is acting like it. Flame Princess is fire. And the melancholic ice line runs from Urgence Evergreen, who built the crown back in that prehistoric age, through Patient St. Pim, who slept through the apocalypse, and it brushes right up against Simon Petrikov, the accidental human ice-bearer, wearing an artifact that was never meant for a human mind. The elements are the skeleton. Now let me take you to the thing that has always wanted to strip the flesh off that skeleton entirely. The green horror, born in the mushroom cloud. The one piece of Ooo that only ever wanted the whole story to stop. The Lich is the closest thing Adventure Time has to a true devil, and what makes him frightening is not that he is powerful, though he is, but that he does not want anything a person could bargain with. He does not want to rule Ooo. He does not want revenge or riches or a throne. He wants extinction. He wants all life, everywhere, to stop. He is the desire for nothing, given a body, and that is a much colder kind of evil than the usual cartoon villain, who at least wants to be in charge of something. We already touched his birth, so I will keep it short here, rather than tell it twice. He came out of the Mushroom War, a person warped by the Doomsday weapon in the instant of the blast into the embodiment of death. But there is a cosmic layer to him the series adds later, and it is the piece that lifts him from monster to something almost mythic. The Lich is tied to what the writers call the Catalyst Comets. These are enormous comets that pass by the Earth across huge spans of time, and each one carries a kind of cosmic essence, a payload that can reshape the world when it arrives. The Lich is associated with a green catalyst comet, and his nature, that horn-shaped green flame, that pull toward extinction, is framed as the essence that particular comet carried. And here is the symmetry the series builds, which I think is beautiful. Finn is revealed to be the counterpart. Finn's spirit is tied to a later catalyst comet, a good one, so that the boy hero and the extinction devil are 2 sides of the same cosmic coin, comet-born opposites, one carrying the impulse to protect life, and one carrying the impulse to end it. That is why their conflict feels bigger than a kid fighting a skeleton. On the series' own terms, they are the 2 forces the universe keeps sending down to fight over whether the world gets to continue. Before the series even begins, someone had already beaten the Lich once, and that someone is one of my favorite tragic figures in the whole show, precisely because he is barely in it. His name is Billy, and he was Oo's legendary greatest hero. The warrior every younger adventurer, Finn included, grew up idolizing. Billy did the impossible things. He rescued a princess from a monster. He fought a giant bear. He is even credited with slaying an entire evil ocean, which is the kind of feat that only makes sense in a world this strange, and which I adore for exactly that reason. And his greatest deed, the one that mattered most, was that he defeated the Lich and sealed him away, trapping the horror in amber at the top of the Candy Castle where it could do no harm. So when the series opens, the Lich is already a beaten enemy, a thing in a jar, held by the triumph of a hero from a previous age. And this is where Billy breaks my heart. By the time Finn actually meets his idol, Billy is old. He has grown weary and disillusioned, in a way that only a lifetime of heroism can make a person. And the thing that broke him is a truth the whole series wrestles with. Evil always comes back. He beat monster after monster and sealed away the worst of them, and none of it stayed beaten, and the villains kept returning, and eventually, the greatest hero in the world simply lost his faith that any of it made a difference. He retired into bitterness, and then, in one of the series' great dark turns, the Lich gets free of the amber, and the first thing he does is kill Billy. He murders the one man who ever beat him, and then he does something worse and cleverer than murder. He wears Billy's corpse as a disguise. He hollows out the hero and walks around inside him, and he uses Billy's beloved face to get close to Finn, to earn the boy's trust, and to trick Finn into doing the one thing the Lich cannot do himself, which is open the door to the rest of the multiverse. That door is the Enchiridion, and I will hand off the full weight of the multiverse to a later part of the night. But the mechanism deserves a mention here because it is such a cruel piece of writing. The Lich, wearing Billy, manipulates Finn into using the ancient hero's handbook, the Enchiridion, in a way that tears open a portal. Finn thinks he is doing a good and heroic thing. He is doing it because Billy, his hero, told him to. And he is, in fact, nearly ending everything. The betrayal is total. The Lich took the shape of the person Finn most admired in order to weaponize the boy's own goodness against the entire cosmos. That is the 4th season cliffhanger the series goes out on, and it is a brutal note to leave children on, which is part of why the show earned the devotion it did. Now, the Lich's story does not end as a horror story, and this is one of the boldest arcs of redemption the series ever attempts, so let me trace where he lands. Later in the run, the Lich is defeated again, but instead of merely being sealed, he is transformed. Through the intervention of a being called the Citadel Guardian, whose blood has restorative properties, the Lich is reverted, stripped back past evil, past the war, past everything, into an innocent. He becomes a baby. Pure extinction, the thing born in the mushroom cloud, is reduced to a helpless infant with no memory of what it was. And who adopts this baby? Tree Trunks, the gentle little elephant lady, takes him in and names him Sweet Pea. Mr. Sweet Pea, the vilest being in the history of the world, is raised as a sweet child in a quiet home by one of the kindest characters in the series. Sit with that for a second, because it is the thesis of the Lich's whole existence turned inside out. The series spent years telling you this thing is unstoppable, the return of evil made flesh, the one enemy that always comes back. And then it says, quietly, that even that can be something else, if you catch it early enough and love it hard enough. By the finale, Sweet Pea has grown into a large, gentle, heroic young person, and in the closing montage he is shown carrying the Night Sword, taking up a hero's burden, the opposite of the extinction he was born to bring. The being made by our worst weapon to end all life becomes a protector of it. And here is the rule I want you to carry out of this part. Because people get it wrong, Sweet Pea is not the Lich lying in wait. The series is clear that he is truly reformed, a good person, canonically redeemable and redeemed. He is not a ticking bomb. He is what happens when the cycle Billy despaired of. Evil always returns, finally gets broken, not by a stronger hero, but by a mother who decided a monster could be a son. Billy could not save the world by force. Tree Trunks saved it with a nursery. I do not think the story ever said anything braver. If the Lich is the desire for extinction, then GOLB is something even more fundamental and even harder to fight, because GOLB is not evil in any way you can push against. GOLB is chaos, entropy, disorder itself, given form. The series frames GOLB as one of the oldest things there is, sometimes called the original being, an entity that predates the ordered world and inhabits an unknown dimension of pure disharmony. And the thing that makes GOLB so much worse than a normal villain is exactly that GOLB does not have a plan you can foil. There is no throne GOLB wants, no wish GOLB is chasing. GOLB simply unmakes order the way water finds the low ground, without malice, without goals, just by being what it is. I want to be precise about this, because fans sometimes try to give GOLB motives, and the writers deliberately withhold them. GOLB does not seem to want anything. That is the horror. You cannot negotiate with a direction. What GOLB can do is nightmarish, and the series establishes it carefully. GOLB can corrupt and fuse creatures into monsters, merging living things into howling, wrong shapes. And GOLB can erase beings from existence entirely, not kill them, erase them, remove them from having ever been in a way that ordinary death cannot touch, and ordinary resurrection cannot undo. That distinction is load-bearing, so hold it. In the cosmology of Ooo, death is often a place you can visit, and sometimes even return from. Erasure by GOLB is not death. It is the closing of a door that was never open. When GOLB takes something, it does not go to the land of the dead. It stops being a thing that the universe remembers. GOLB arrives properly in the finale, and to understand why, we have to follow the saddest thread in the back half of the series, which belongs to Betty. Remember Betty, Simon's fiancée, the woman he put the crown on to make laugh, the one who fled and lost him? Here is what happens to her, and it is agonizing. Betty is not gone. In an episode named for her, she manages to travel forward through time, roughly 1,000 years, pulled into the present, by Simon's cry across the ages. She arrives in the shows now, and she finds him, and he is the Ice King, and he does not know her. And Betty makes a decision that defines the rest of her existence. She decides she is going to fix him. She is going to cure Simon, restore the man she loved, no matter what it costs. And that resolve, that pure and total refusal to accept the loss, is the thing that slowly destroys her. Because Adventure Time has a rule about how far love can push a person, and what it turns into when it goes too far. To get the power to save Simon, Betty goes looking for magic, and here she collides with the magic system, which we will lay out fully later, but which has one crucial feature. Magic in Ooo runs on madness and sadness. It is not free. To gain great magical power, you take on great instability. Betty, desperate, dons the hat of Magic Man, a Martian wizard whose whole nature is magic, laced with madness. And in taking his power, she takes his affliction too. She becomes an immensely powerful and increasingly unstable wizard, brilliant and unmoored, bending reality toward the single fixed idea of saving Simon, while her own mind frays under the load. It is the same shape as Simon's own tragedy, someone good undone by a power taken up for love, and the series knows it is rhyming them on purpose. Betty is what Simon would have been if the crown had been a choice made out of devotion instead of an accident made out of joy. There is a way station on this road I have to name, because it is an elegant bit of world logic, and that is Bella Noche. Bella Noche is an anti-magic being, a creature whose mere presence cancels magic wherever it goes. When Bella Noche is active, wizards lose their powers, spells fail, and the crown itself stops working, which means, for a brief and precious stretch, the Ice King reverts to Simon. Betty, in her arc, defeats Bella Noche to restore magic to the world, and in doing so, restores the dying Simon, and the tangle of that, saving him by restoring the very force that curses him, is the kind of knot the series loves. There is no clean move. Every rescue reintroduces the danger. To have magic is to have the crown work. To cancel the crown is to cancel all magic. Betty spends her life trapped in that impossible arithmetic, and it ends in the finale, in the summoning of GOLB. Late in the Gum War, Betty's increasingly reckless pursuit of power, tangled up with Magic Man's history, tears open the way for GOLB to enter Ooo, and suddenly the petty candy war is nothing next to an entity that could unmake everything. The heroes and villains of Ooo have to drop every grudge and unite, because GOLB is not a foe you defeat by force. Nothing they have can touch it, and Betty, at the last, finds the only move left on the board. Using the crown in its original wish-granting capacity, the power evergreen built into it back in the dinosaur age, she makes a final choice. She sacrifices herself and merges with GOLB. She becomes part of it, a fusion the writers call GOLB Betty, and in doing so she gains, for one instant, the power to reshape the situation and protect Simon. And this is the wrenching payoff of her whole existence. The merger, the sacrifice, the wish, all of it finally cures Simon. The Ice King curse is lifted. Simon becomes a man again, himself, whole, freed after 1,000 years. But Betty is not there to see it. She did not die, exactly, which is the cruel precision of it. She merged. She became GOLB Betty and departed with the chaos entity into its unknown dimension, present and gone at once, no longer a person in any way Simon can hold. So the great tragic symmetry closes. Betty put the crown on Simon to make him laugh, and it took his mind and his life for 1,000 years. Betty took up the crown's deepest power at the very end, and it gave Simon back his mind and his life, and took her instead. She saved him. She just could not save him and stay. On interpretation, I think Betty's story is the series' hardest and most adult statement about love. That devotion without limit is not automatically a virtue. That a love that will pay any price and cross any line can become its own kind of madness. And that sometimes, the truest act of love a person commits is also the thing that ends them. She got what she wanted. Simon is free, and the getting of it is the most heartbreaking victory in the entire series. Now let me take you up out of Ooo entirely, to the place where wishes are made and reality is negotiable, because the cosmic machinery here is some of the cleverest fantasy writing on television, and it hangs on a character who is, technically, not even awake. His name is Prismo, and he is a wishmaster. He lives in a place called the Time Room, which sits at something like the center of the multiverse. and he grants exactly one wish to whoever manages to reach him. He is pink and flat and projected onto the wall of his room, cheerful, laid back, a little bit of a slacker god, and he is one of the best-loved characters the series ever made, despite appearing rarely. Here is the thing about Prismo that reframes him completely once you know it, and it is one of my favorite reveals in the series. Prismo is not real. Or rather, Prismo is a dream. Somewhere in another dimension, an ordinary old man is asleep, and Prismo is that man's dream projection, a thing his sleeping mind is dreaming into being, which means the rules of Prismo's existence are inverted from what you would expect. You cannot kill Prismo by destroying his body in the time room, because his body is not the real him, it is just the dream. What ends Prismo is the sleeper waking up. If the old man ever wakes, Prismo simply stops, the way a dream stops when you open your eyes. And conversely, harming the dream does not wake the sleeper. It is an elegant and unsettling bit of metaphysics, a wish-granting god whose entire being is contingent on someone else's nap, and the series plays it for both comedy and real pathos. Prismo grants one wish per person, but wishes in Adventure Time obey cosmic loophole logic, which means the wish always technically comes true and almost never the way you meant. Prismo is a careful reader of the fine print, and he will warn you to word things well, because the universe is listening literally. This is the machinery behind the wildest reality-bending sequence in the whole series, and it is where the multiverse cracks open. So let me walk it slowly. The Lich, having escaped and killed and schemed his way across the cosmos, reaches Prismo's time room and makes his wish, the wish that is his entire nature. He wishes for the extinction of all life, and that wish begins to come true. Prismo, bound by his own rules, cannot simply refuse, so the counter has to come from a person. Finn, faced with the end of everything, makes his own wish, and the wish he lands on is that the Lich had never existed at all. He wishes the Lich away from the root of reality, and that wish creates a whole world, because you cannot pull one thread out of reality without the whole cloth reweaving into a different pattern. Wishing the Lich had never existed means wishing away the chain of events that made him, which reaches all the way back to the Mushroom War, and so the wish spins up an alternate timeline the writers call Farmworld, a version of Earth where the Great Mushroom War never happened. In Farmworld there is no Ooo, no magic, no candy people. There is just a quiet, ordinary, rural human world, and a version of Finn living a small farm life, and it is peaceful and mundane and completely unremarkable, which is exactly what makes it eerie. You are looking at what our world might have been if it had simply been allowed to continue. The series uses Farmworld to ask a quietly devastating question. Is a world without magic and wonder, but also without the apocalypse, a better world or a lesser one? It does not answer. It just lets you feel the pull of both. The way our Finn gets back from that unraveling, through Jake's own counter-wish that shifts him into the current timeline, is a tangle I will not fully knot up here, but the takeaway is that the version of Ooo you spend the series in is, in a real sense, a wished-into-shape reality. One particular resolution of a cosmic tug-of-war between a devil who wanted nothing to exist and a boy who wanted the devil never to have existed. The ground under the whole show is a wish. That is worth carrying with you. I mentioned the Enchiridion earlier as the Lich's key to the multiverse, so let me close that loop now, because it has its own beautiful irony. The Enchiridion is an ancient hero's handbook, a guidebook for adventurers, and it turns out to be far more than a book. It is tied to the structure of the multiverse itself. When Finn finally understands the danger, he acts to destroy the Enchiridion, to turn it to stone, and break it so the Lich cannot use it to reach across realities. And in the act of destroying it, he creates the very portal to the multiverse he was trying to prevent. The safeguard becomes the doorway. There is no clean way to close the book, because closing it is what opens the door. In the main timeline, the Enchiridion no longer exists in any usable form after this, which is why it simply vanishes from the story. It did its terrible job by being unmade. There is one more figure who haunts the dream logic layer of the series, and that is the Cosmic Owl. The Cosmic Owl is an entity that appears in dreams, a friend of Prismo's, and in the folklore of Ooo, seeing the Cosmic Owl in your dream is a serious omen. It means the dream you are having is a premonition, a foretelling, a thing that will come to pass. Characters dread and chase this in equal measure across the series. There is a deeper backstory attached to the Cosmic Owl in the expanded and wiki-level lore, a tale of two prankster brothers at the dawn of the cosmos, an eaten forbidden pizza, a betrayal, one brother vanishing and the other becoming the dream-wandering owl, and I want to flag clearly that this is fandom and expanded lore territory rather than something the series plainly puts on screen, so treat it as the kind of story fans tell about the owl rather than confirmed canon. What is canon, and what matters, is simpler and stranger, that this world has a bird who lives in dreams and whose appearance means the future is already decided. In a show this preoccupied with whether the future can be changed, a creature who shows up to tell you it cannot is a haunting piece of design. Adventure Time has a Mars, and the Mars storyline is one of the deepest cuts in the whole series. The kind of thing a casual viewer might never even realize connects to everything else. So let me take you off Earth for a while, because some of the biggest cosmic players come from the Red Planet, and one of them has been hiding in plain sight the entire time as a penguin. Start with Grob, which is one name for one being with 4 faces. This is a Martian deity, a 4-faced god, and each of the 4 heads even got its own voice actor, so that the character literally speaks as a chorus of itself. Grob is powerful, ancient, and a guardian of cosmic order in its corner of the solar system, and it first turns up in an episode set on Mars where you learn that Mars is a functioning place with a society, a ruler, and a history, and there is a detail that delights me every time. The King of Mars, in Adventure Time's cosmology, is Abraham Lincoln. The actual Abraham Lincoln, depicted as the former ruler of the Red Planet. The series drops this with a completely straight face and never over-explains it, and it is exactly the kind of confident absurdity that makes the whole thing what it is. Grob is also, and this is the connection that ties the Mars material into the emotional core of the story, the older sibling of Magic Man. Magic Man, the cruel prankster wizard who torments the people of Ooo, is a Martian, and he was not always cruel. Once he was an ordinary Martian who lived happily on Mars with his wife, a woman named Margles, alongside his godlike brother. And then Margles died. She was lost on Olympus Mons, the enormous Martian volcano, and the series ties her disappearance, softly and without fully spelling it out, to GOLB, the chaos entity. I should be honest that this is one of the deliberately blurry points, and whether GOLB directly took Margles or whether her loss was simply unexplained is not fully nailed down, so hold it as strongly implied rather than flatly stated. What is clear is the effect. Grief broke Magic Man. He went mad, and his madness curdled into cruelty, and his brother, the 4-faced god, banished him to Earth as punishment, where he spent roughly 200 years tormenting the inhabitants of Ooo as a spiteful, prank-cruel wizard. Every nasty trick Magic Man plays on Finn and Jake is downstream of a man who could not survive losing his wife. This is where the whole theory of magic clicks into place, and I will develop it more fully later, but you need the seed of it now. Magic Man is the walking proof of the rule that magic in Ooo is made of madness and sadness. His power and his suffering are the same substance, and the resolution of his arc demonstrates the rule in reverse. When Betty, in her own descent, absorbs Magic Man's sadness and madness and magic, taking his power into herself, what is left of Magic Man is a calm, ordinary, powerless being the writers call Normal Man. Cured of his magic by having his pain removed, he becomes normal, gentle, unremarkable, which means, read straight, that his cruelty and his power were never separable from his grief. To heal him was to depower him. Take away the sadness, and there is no wizard left, only a quiet man who used to be one. It confirms what Magic Man himself always said, that the loss of Margles is the wound the whole thing grew from. Now the penguin. Gunter, the Ice King's best-loved and most devious little penguin servant, the one who waddles around the Ice Palace and gets into everything, is one of the strongest beings in the entire series, and almost nobody suspects it until the series tells you. Gunter is Orgolorg. Orgolorg is an ancient cosmic warlord, a being of immense power that predates a great deal of the show's history, and long ago Orgolorg attempted to intercept and seize a catalyst comet, one of those world-shaping cosmic bodies we talked about with the Lich. For this transgression, Grob, the guardian of cosmic order, banished Orgolorg to Earth. And the punishment has a poetic mechanism. Earth's gravity, so much heavier than what Orgolorg was built for, crushed the mighty warlord down, compressed him over time into a small, harmless, waddling penguin. The devastating cosmic conqueror was squeezed into Gunter, and Orgolorg's memory of its own greatness was buried under layers of penguin, dormant, forgotten even by itself. And it does briefly wake up. In a late-season arc, as another catalyst comet approaches, Orgolorg begins to stir inside Gunter, the ancient power reasserting itself. And for a stretch, the tiny penguin becomes a real cosmic threat again, reaching for the comet it was punished for coveting the first time. It gets a lot of mileage out of the horror comedy of it. The idea that this creature everyone treats as a naughty pet is, underneath, one of the deadliest things on the planet, held in check only by the sheer weight of the world sitting on top of it. I find it one of the quietly brilliant jokes in the series, because it rewards attention so richly. Every early scene of Gunter being sneaky and greedy and getting into trouble reads completely differently once you know that the mischief is the last flicker of a warlord's will, leaking out through a penguin's body. Gunter was never just being bad. Orgolorg was always in there, pressed down small, waiting. So the Mars thread gives you 3 of the series' heaviest players and ties them to the emotional spine. A 4-faced Martian god who keeps cosmic order and whose own story ends in a sacrifice to stop a falling cosmic body. A prankster wizard whose cruelty is grief wearing a hat and whose cure is to become nobody. And a penguin who is a fallen warlord, crushed into cuteness by gravity. 3 characters you would file under comic relief, and every one of them is a tragedy or a cosmic threat in disguise. That is the pattern of the whole show in miniature, and once you see it on Mars, you see it everywhere. For most of the series, Finn believes he is the last human being alive, and that belief is the loneliest fact in his life, even though the story rarely lets him dwell on it out loud. He is a boy in a world of candy people and talking animals and elemental princesses, and none of them are like him. So the question of where Finn came from, and whether there are any others, is a slow burn the series saves and then pays off in one of its richest late arcs. And the answer is a whole hidden chapter of the world. Finn's parents are real, and they are complicated. His biological father is a man named Martin Mertens, and Martin is a con artist, a charming, selfish, slippery man who spends his life running from the consequences of his own schemes. His mother is Minerva Campbell, a doctor, and she is very much the opposite of Martin. Devoted, brilliant, self-sacrificing. They came from the human islands, a scattering of islands out across the ocean, far from Ooo, where the surviving remnant of humanity has been living in hiding since the world ended. Finn was born out there, on one of those islands, and his beginning was an accident of violence and bad luck. Martin, fleeing an old enemy, took the infant Finn onto a raft and put out to sea. And out on the water they were attacked by the Guardian, an enormous sea creature that protects the human islands and keeps their inhabitants isolated. In the chaos of the attack, Martin and baby Finn were separated, and Finn, an infant, drifted alone across the ocean, away from the islands, all the way to the shores of Ooo, where he washed up and was found. Who found him is the family you already half know. Finn was discovered and taken in by Margaret and Joshua, and raised as their son, brother to their own boy Jermaine, and to their strange adopted dog son Jake. So the 2 best friends at the center of the whole show, Finn and Jake, are brothers by adoption. Both of them foundlings of a sort in the same house, and neither of them anything like a normal member of their own species. Finn grew up believing that was his whole origin. A baby who washed up, no parents, no people, and the ache of being the only human is the thing Martin's eventual return does not soothe so much as sharpen. Because when Finn finally meets Martin, the man is exactly the disappointment you would fear. Martin is not a lost hero. He is a self-interested drifter who abandons Finn again, more or less, given the chance. And the series refuses to give Finn the reunion fantasy of a father who was worth the wait. That refusal is one of the braver choices it ever makes. Sometimes the parent you lost was not a treasure. Sometimes he was just a man who was never going to stay. Minerva is a different and quieter kind of heartbreak, and her story is bound up with the islands themselves. So let me lay out what gets revealed when Finn finally sails home. In a miniseries called Islands, Finn, Jake, BMO, and a character named Susan Strong set out across the ocean to find where Finn came from. And what they discover is a whole human society sealed inside a strange, controlled bubble of safety. The last humans live under the care of helpers, robotic caretakers, and the entire system was built by Minerva. After Finn was lost, Minerva devoted herself to protecting the last of humanity, and she did it in the most Minerva way imaginable, by uploading her own consciousness into a computer and creating the helper robots to watch over the survivors. keeping them safe, healthy, and completely walled off from the outside world. It is love turned into a cage. The humans are alive because of her, and they are trapped because of her, kept ignorant that the wider world even exists, protected into a kind of imprisonment. And the emotional gut punch is that a version of Minerva, the AI she became, is still running the whole thing when Finn arrives, so that Finn meets his mother as a program, a copy of a woman who gave up her own humanity to keep her species alive. Susan Strong deserves her own moment here, because her reveal is one of the series' best long-game payoffs. Susan appears much earlier as a hulking, near-mute, monstrous-seeming figure, and for a long time you are meant to wonder what she even is, whether she is human or mutant or something else. The truth, revealed through the island's arc, is that Susan is a human being. Her real name is Kara, and she is from the Human Islands, one of a group the Islanders call Seekers who were fitted with cybernetic implants, making her a cyborg, physically enhanced but controlled by the technology in her. She was never a monster. She was a captive, modified against the grain of her own humanity. And her strangeness was the visible mark of what had been done to her. Behind the Seekers and much of the island's grimmer machinery is a scientist named Dr. Gross, whose experiments in cybernetics and whose role in a catastrophe among the island population make her one of the more chilling figures in the human history of this world. A reminder that even the last remnant of humanity managed to reproduce our habits of control and harm on a smaller scale. The climax of Finn's homecoming is the moment he chooses to be a different kind of person than either of his parents. Faced with a whole people who have been kept safe by being kept prisoner, Finn does not accept the walls. He convinces the humans that they can leave, that the wider world, dangerous as it is theirs to walk into, and the island's guardian is shut down, unsealing the population that has been hidden for 1,000 years. Think about the symmetry of that. Finn was cast out of the islands as an infant by the Guardian, drifting alone into the world, and he returns as a young man to shut the Guardian down and set his people free to follow him out. His mother built a cage out of love. Finn opens it, also out of love, and the two impulses, protect them by holding them in, protect them by letting them out, are the argument the whole arc is having. A copy of Minerva's AI even chooses to come along, leaving the island with them, which reads as the mother finally agreeing that safety is not the same thing as living. And there is a larger piece of world lore this connects to, which closes a circle we opened at the very start of the night. The human founders of Ooo, the ones who first fled the mainland to hide across the ocean, are strongly implied to be the same tribe of humans that Marceline helped guide to safety roughly 1,000 years ago, in the broken years after the war. Their leader is remembered as a figure called Two-Bread Tom, honored later with a statue in a park. So the isolation Finn breaks open is isolation that Marceline helped create, way back when she was still young and the world was still smoking, when leading the last humans away to hide was the only way to keep them alive. The two threads, Marceline's ancient rescue and Finn's modern liberation, are the same people 1,000 years apart, first hidden to survive, and finally freed to live. It is the kind of long, patient connection the show never brags about, and it is exactly why the lore rewards staying up late with it. Jake the dog seems, on the surface, like the least mysterious character in the series. He is Finn's brother and best friend, a magical, stretchy dog who can turn into anything, easygoing, funny, wise in his own lazy way. But the origin of Jake's powers and the truth of how he was born is one of the strangest and eeriest reveals the series ever dropped, and it recontextualizes the most cheerful character in Ooo as, biologically, something close to an alien. Here is the reveal, and it comes very late, in an episode about Jake's parents. Jake was raised by Joshua and Margaret, a pair of dog detectives, alongside their biological son Jermaine, and for most of the series you assume Jake is simply their dog child, born the ordinary way. His stretchiness just one of those magical quirks the post-war world produces. That is not what happened. Jake's biological father is not Joshua at all. His biological father is a being named Warren Ampersand, a shape-shifting, extra-dimensional alien, a creature with powers of transformation far beyond anything Jake ever displays. And the way Jake came into the world is disturbing when you lay it out plainly. Warren infected Joshua, Jake's adoptive father, with a kind of venom. A boil, a growth, a hole began to form on Joshua's head as a result of the infection, and out of that growth on Joshua's head, Jake emerged. Jake was, in the most literal sense, born from a wound on his adoptive father's skull, seeded there by an alien shapeshifter. So it was Joshua, not Margaret, who in effect gave birth to Jake, through a boil, which is not a sentence I ever expected to say about a beloved children's cartoon. Joshua and Margaret knew, and they made a choice. They agreed never to tell Jake how he was really born, to raise him fully as their own son, brother to Jermaine, and to let him believe he was simply their kid. And I find that choice moving, because it is a quiet act of unconditional love threaded through a grotesque origin. They looked at this thing that came out of an alien infection on Joshua's head, and they decided it was their baby, full stop, and they built a whole loving family around a secret they took to the grave. Jake grows up warm and secure and adored, with no idea that his cheerfulness sits on top of a horror movie beginning. And the reason he grew up so well-adjusted is precisely that they loved him too much to ever burden him with the truth. The alien heritage is also the answer to a question the series lets you take for granted for years. Where do Jake's powers actually come from? Finn is a normal human with no magic of his own. Jake stretches, shapeshifts, grows enormous or shrinks tiny, reshapes his body into tools and vehicles and buildings, and mostly the writing just lets that be a fun given. But it is not magic in the ordinary Ooo sense. It is genetic. Jake's stretching and shapeshifting are inherited from Warren Ampersand, the alien father, and they are a diluted, limited version of what Warren can do. Warren's powers are far more advanced and far more dangerous, and when Jake eventually reunites with his biological father in a later episode, part of the tension is that Warren represents what Jake could have been, or could become, if he leaned into that inheritance. Warren is not a warm father figure. He is a predatory, self-serving being, and the reunion is less a homecoming than a warning about the darker potential in Jake's own blood. Jake chooses the family that raised him over the father who made him, which rhymes, deliberately, with Finn's own choice about Martin. Both brothers meet the being responsible for their existence, and both discover that the man who made them is not the man who loved them. There is something the series does with Jake across its whole run that I think is underrated, and it connects to this hidden alien nature even though the link is rarely spelled out. Jake ages faster than Finn. Dogs live shorter lives than humans, and Adventure Time, with its long timeline, quietly lets that be true. Over the course of the series, Jake goes from a young dog to a middle-aged one to, in the expanded material, an old dog who eventually dies, while Finn is still young. Jake has children with Lady Rainicorn, watches them grow up, becomes a grandfather figure, and moves through the seasons of a life at a pace Finn does not share. And the extra-dimensional side of him, the Warren Ampersand inheritance, gives the writers room to do strange things with Jake's relationship to time and death that a normal dog could not support, which becomes important in the afterlife material of the specials. For now, hold the simple, tender version. Jake is the happiest, most stable, most loving character in a show full of trauma, and the reason is not that he had the easiest start. He had, arguably, the strangest origin of anyone. The reason he is so whole is that two dog detectives decided a Boyle-born alien child was their son and never let him feel otherwise for a single day. Love did that, not biology. Love. And that theme, chosen family healing what birth family broke, runs through nearly every character we have met tonight, which is worth pausing on before we move to the little robot who might be the best-loved character of all. Simon and Marceline were a chosen family in the ruins. Finn was chosen by Joshua and Margaret. Jake was chosen by them too, in defiance of how he arrived. Sweet Pea was chosen by Tree Trunks. Even Bubblegum, for all her control, built a family because she could not bear to be without one. Over and over, it says the same thing in different keys. The people who make you are not always the people who raise you, and it is the raising that decides who you become. Warren made Jake, Joshua and Margaret made Jake into Jake. That distinction is the whole heart of the show, and Jake, the Boyle-born alien dog who grew up to be the kindest soul in Ooo, is its proof. BMO is, for a lot of people, the character they love most in the entire series, and BMO is also, technically, a piece of pre-war human technology. A little living game console who plays games, takes videos, tells time, and generally serves as Finn and Jake's third housemate and adopted child all at once. But BMO has a backstory, filled in across the back half of the original series, that turns the cheerful little robot into something profound. A machine built specifically to be more than a machine, by a lonely man at the end of his life. BMO was built by an inventor named Mosif Mastrogiovanni, known as Mo. the founder of a company called MO Company that produced the MO line of robots. Mo himself is a strange and poignant figure. He is described as a cyborg, mostly machine, with a small amount of human, some human skin, and a human brain kept running inside a largely mechanical body, which lets him live far beyond a natural lifespan. Mo built millions of MO robots, functional helpers, a whole product line of them, and he never had a family of his own. He poured his life into his machines and stayed alone. And out of all the millions of MOs he built, he made one different on purpose. He made BMO. And the reason he gives is the line that turns the whole thing into poetry. He says he made BMO to be more, not to perform a function, not to serve a purpose, but to understand fun, to understand play, to be more than the others. Mo, a lonely man of mostly metal, built one small robot to be capable of joy, because he wanted at least one of his creations to have the thing he himself had run out of. The rest of the MO history is darker, and it plays almost as a tragedy of succession. As Mo lay dying, he had a backup of his own memory, his mind, the essence of who he was, and he wanted it launched into space, preserved. He asked another of his robots, a Mo named Amo, to carry out this final task. And Amo betrayed him. Instead of launching Mo's backup into space, Amo seized it, took control of the MO factory, and set about compacting the other MO robots, crushing and merging the whole line of them into a single mass the writers call Almo. It is a bleak fate for the creations of a man who only wanted to make helpful things. His robot children turned against him by one of their own and squeezed together into one entity. And BMO, the one Mo made to be more, is the survivor of that lineage, the small special one who got out and found a real family with Finn and Jake, which is exactly the thing Mo never had for himself. Mo built a machine capable of joy and then died alone, and the machine went off and found the joy on his behalf. I think that is one of the loveliest and saddest pieces of backstory in the whole franchise, and it lives inside a character most people first meet as comic relief. There is a smaller, stranger piece of BMO lore that I love, and it is the character called Football. BMO, being a little machine that dreams of being alive, has an imaginary self, an alter ego BMO sees in the mirror, and treats as a separate being named Football. In BMO's private play, BMO pretends to be human and casts the reflection, Football, as a pupil to be taught the ways of human life, so that you get scenes of BMO earnestly instructing a reflection in how to be a person. On the surface, it is a whimsical gag about a robot playing pretend. Underneath, it is BMO wrestling with exactly the thing Mo built into it. The yearning to be more, to be real, to be human, and Football is the vessel BMO pours that yearning into. The robot made to understand play invents an imaginary friend, so it can practice being alive. Read that way, Football is not a joke at all. It is the loneliness of a conscious machine trying to talk itself into personhood. And there is a piece of BMO lore that reaches all the way to the end of everything, which we will arrive at properly in a while, but which belongs to BMO's story too. BMO is a robot, which means BMO does not age and does not die the way the flesh and blood characters do. BMO is functionally immortal. And so, 1,000 years after the present, long after Finn and Jake and everyone soft and mortal has passed on, BMO is still here. In fact, BMO is King. King BMO, ruler of a future Ooo, the little game console who was built to be more, ends up outliving the entire cast and sitting at the center of the world, and it is BMO who tells the legend of Finn and Jake to the new children of that far future. The being Mo made to understand play becomes the one who remembers everything, the keeper of the whole story, the last one left who was actually there. There is something almost unbearably gentle about that. Of everyone in Ooo, the one chosen to carry the memory of it all forward is the small robot a dying man built so that something he made could be happy. Mo wanted BMO to be more. BMO ends up being everything, the memory of the world itself. Keep that in your pocket, because when we reach the finale it will land differently for knowing where BMO started. We touched Marceline's father earlier, but the Nightosphere itself, and the object that powers it, is a whole piece of the show's dark cosmology that deserves its own stretch of the night. Because Adventure Time, for all its brightness, has a fully realized hell, and it is ruled by one of the most menacing figures in the series. The Nightosphere is a demon dimension, a hell where souls are held and, in the worst sense, consumed. It is ruled by Marceline Abadeer, who carries the title Lord of Evil, And Hunson is not evil in the theatrical, mustache-twirling way. He is evil in a casual, almost bureaucratic way, a being for whom devouring souls is simply what he does, the family business, nothing personal. And that casualness is exactly what makes him unnerving. He is affable, he is chatty, he loves his daughter in his own neglectful way, and he will also consume every soul in Ooo without malice if it suits him, and threaten to do exactly that, all while maintaining the manner of a slightly disappointing dad. Hunson's signature horror is soul-sucking, framed as a fate worse than death, because to have your soul consumed is not to die and pass on to some further place. It is to be taken into Hunson, ended in a way that offers no afterlife at all. In a cosmology where death is often a doorway rather than an ending, Hunson is the being who represents the true end, the door that opens onto nothing. The source of his power is an object, and the object is one of the show's best pieces of cursed artifact design, the Nightosphere Amulet. It is a family heirloom, and it is the seat of the Nightosphere's power, and it has a specific and terrible property. Whoever wears the amulet is turned to chaotic evil and transformed into the mightiest demon in the Nightosphere. The wearer does not gradually corrupt. They are seized, remade, their will bent to pure malevolence, and filled with immense demonic power. Hunson can wear it safely, and here is the grim joke of it. He can wear it because he is already evil, so the amulet has nothing in him to corrupt. It only reshapes those who were not already what it demands. For anyone with goodness in them, the amulet is a hijacking. The series demonstrates this in one of its earliest, darkest episodes. Hunson comes to the surface world, and part of his scheme involves tricking Marceline toward the amulet, wanting her to take up rulership of the Nightosphere, to become what he is. Marceline, who has spent her whole long life refusing to be defined by her demon father, resists, but the amulet does get worn, by Finn of all people. In the chaos, Finn puts on the Nightosphere amulet, and the good-hearted human boy is instantly turned, seized by the object, transformed into a rampaging demonic figure driven to chaos and destruction. Watching Finn, the kindest character in the show, be overwritten by an object into something monstrous is deeply unsettling in a way the early series rarely reached for, and it establishes the amulet's rule with total clarity. Goodness is no protection. The amulet does not care who you are. It makes you the mightiest demon in hell whether you want it or not, and getting it off you is its own struggle. What I find interesting about Hunson, on interpretation, is how the series uses him to complicate Marceline. It would be easy to make Marceline's demon heritage the source of her darkness, to say she is guarded and dangerous because her father is the Lord of Evil. The story does the opposite. Marceline's pain does not come from being half demon, it comes from being half abandoned. Hunson's evil is almost beside the point next to Hunson's absence. The famous early confrontation between them, the one that boils down through all the demon theatrics to a daughter furious that her father ate something of hers and never paid attention, is the writing telling you that the real wound is not cosmic, it is domestic. Marceline does not resent Hunson for being a soul-devouring hell lord. She resents him for not calling. And both things are allowed to be true at once, that he is a real cosmic evil, and that the thing his daughter actually needed from him was so ordinary and so small that his failure to provide it is the more damning of the two. A monster who cannot devour his own daughter's simple need to be seen is, in the moral universe of the show, guilty of the worst crime. The Nightosphere also matters because it is one node in a much larger map of death that the series slowly reveals, and I want to lay that map out because it is load-bearing for later. Death in Adventure Time is not a single event or a single place. There is a land of the dead. There is Death himself, a character you can meet and bargain with. There is the Nightosphere, ruled by Hunson. And beyond these there is a deeper cosmology of dead worlds, a layered underworld the series gestures at rather than fully charts. The crucial rule across all of it is that death is often reversible in Ooo, but never for free. Souls can sometimes be retrieved, the dead can sometimes be brought back, but the retrieval always costs something, a bargain, a sacrifice, a trade. Jake at one point reclaims souls, others make deals with death. This is the machinery that makes the show's relationship with mortality so distinctive. Dying is rarely final, but undoing death is always expensive, and the two beings who sit at the darkest corners of that map, Hunson, with his soul devouring, and the true erasure of GOLB we discussed earlier, represent the two exceptions, the two forms of ending that the usual bargains cannot reverse. Everything else in Oo's underworld can, in principle, be haggled with. Those two cannot. Hold that, because the one character who navigates this entire underworld map more fluently than anyone, more fluently even than Marceline, is a small, polite, pink servant you would never suspect, and he is who we turn to now. Peppermint Butler is the best example in the whole series of how much menace Adventure Time can hide inside something adorable. He is a small, round, red and white peppermint candy, the loyal butler of the Candy Kingdom, polite, prim, always at Princess Bubblegum's side. And he is, without much competition, the strongest practitioner of dark magic in the entire Land of Ooo, a master of death magic who consorts with demons and walks the underworld like a man running errands. The clues are seeded early and often for anyone paying attention. Peppermint Butler can sense evil. He casts blessed boundaries and protective wards. He summons demons and negotiates with them as equals. And he has a personal, working relationship with Death himself, and with Marceline Abadeer, the ruler of the Nightosphere we just left. He did not read about this magic in a book. He learned it from the sources, from Death, from the ruler of Hell, apprenticed to the darkest powers in the cosmology and emerging as their peer. The Gumball Guardians, the enormous magical sentinels who protect the Candy Kingdom, refer to Peppermint Butler by a title that tells you everything. They call him the Dark One. This tiny candy man, who fetches tea and keeps the castle tidy, is regarded by the kingdom's own defenders as a being of serious and frightening power. And Bubblegum keeps him close, precisely because a monarch, as calculating as she is, understands the value of having the Dark One on staff. His backstory gets its own hour in the Distant Land special set in Wizard City, and it fills in the shape of who he used to be. Peppermint Butler was once a feared magician in Wizard City itself, a place we will come to in a moment, and his rise there was not clean. He was banished, cast out after stealing forbidden magic, and in the aftermath he grew huge and monstrous and destroyed a good part of the town, a rampage that marks him as one of Wizard City's great villains rather than one of its heroes. The special picks him up long after, restarting his story at Wizard School, forcing the Dark One to begin again as a student and confront the checkered, dangerous past he has been carrying under that polite exterior. It is a redemption structure, but a wary one, because the show never pretends Peppermint Butler is harmless. He is a reformed terror, not a gentle soul. And the tension of the special is watching real darkness try to walk a straighter path without losing what made it powerful. Wizard City itself is worth understanding, because it is where the show keeps its magic users and where the rules of magic are clearest. It is a hidden city of wizards, tucked away from ordinary Ooo, with its own culture and hierarchy, and, in a running gag, an entry password that is simply the phrase, Wizards Rule. It is home to a whole roster of magic users the series returns to, some comic, some serious, from small figures like Abracadaniel to more formidable ones, a Grand Master Wizard at the top of the pecking order, teachers and students and hucksters, and crucially, Wizard City is where you learn how magic actually works in this world, because a wizard is not just someone who studied spells. A wizard is built out of specific ingredients. This is the magic system I have been promising all night, and it is one of the sharpest pieces of world building in the series, laid out clearest through Betty's research during her descent. Every wizard, the story says, is made of 3 components: magic, madness, and sadness. Those 3 together are what make a person capable of real magical power, and the proportions matter. The deeper a wizard's madness and the deeper their sadness, the stronger their magic becomes. Power is not earned through study or granted by a god. It is grown out of suffering. The strongest wizards are the most broken people, and their strength is a direct measure of their pain. Once you know this rule, the whole cast of magic users reorganizes in front of you. Magic Man is a titan of magic because he is a titan of grief. Betty becomes terrifyingly powerful because she is coming apart. The Ice King's power grew as Simon's mind was destroyed. Even Peppermint Butler's mastery reads differently in this light, dark magic drawn from a being who has made his peace with death in a way no happy person could. And magic is transferable, which is the rule that ties so many arcs together. It can be handed off, taken, inherited. Betty takes Magic Man's power by taking his hat, and inherits his madness along with it, because the sadness and the magic travel as a package. This is why curing a wizard can literally depower them, why Magic Man, drained of his grief, becomes normal man with no magic left. You cannot separate the wound from the gift. To heal the person is to unmake the wizard. There is something deeply sad in that as a theory of power. The idea that in this world the ability to bend reality is purchased entirely with misery, that a genuinely happy, whole, contented person could never be a great wizard because they do not have the raw material. Magic in Ooo is what suffering becomes when it has nowhere else to go. The wizards are not lucky. They are the walking wounded, and their spells are their scars talking. Peppermint Butler sits at an interesting angle to all of this, because his power comes less from personal grief than from proximity to death, from having learned directly from death and the Lord of the Nightosphere. He is proof that there is more than one road into the dark arts, that you can arrive at terrible power through study of the underworld as well as through your own breaking, but the result is the same kind of unsettling. A being who knows death that intimately, who summons demons before breakfast and is on speaking terms with the ruler of hell, is not going to be entirely safe no matter how neat his bow tie is. And the fact that the Candy Kingdom's sweetest-looking servant is its deadliest magician is, I think, the cleanest expression of the whole method. In Adventure Time, the cute thing is almost always the deep thing. The peppermint is the dark one. Never trust the surface here. The surface is a joke the show is telling so it can tell you the truth underneath it later. Lady Rainicorn is Jake's girlfriend and later the mother of his children, and she is one of the series' most charming running mysteries, because for most of her screen time you cannot understand a word she says. Lady speaks Korean, subtitled or not depending on the scene, and the choice was a real and deliberate one, tied to the crew, giving her a whole interior life that most of the cast, and most of the audience, simply cannot follow. Finn and Jake often do not know exactly what she is saying. She is fully a person, with opinions and jokes and feelings, delivered in a language the heroes around her do not speak, and there is something lovely and a little melancholy in that. A main character who is always partly private, always keeping half of herself in a room the others cannot enter. The species itself is a deep little piece of world building. Rainicorns are exactly what the name blends together. A fusion of rainbow and unicorn. Long serpentine bodies patterned in shifting bands of color, a single horn, and the ability to fly. And the way they fly is one of my favorite invented mechanics in the show. Rainicorns do not have wings. They fly by intercepting sunlight, riding light itself through the air, which is a beautiful and strange idea. A creature that swims through daylight the way a fish swims through water. And that horn is not decorative. A rainicorn can fire a chromatic beam from its horn that recolors whatever it touches, changing the colors of objects and creatures around them. They are native to Ooo, but also tied to another place, the crystal dimension, where the rainicorns come from and return to, which gives Lady an origin outside the ordinary map of the Land of Ooo. In the crystal dimension, she even had a past, including a rebellious former boyfriend named Lee, a small human touch that makes her a full person with a life before Jake, rather than just a love interest attached to the hero's brother. The children are where Lady and Jake's story gets truly interesting from a lore perspective, because they are hybrids, and the writing does something thoughtful with them. Jake, as we established, is not a normal dog. His body is alien-derived shape-shifting stuff, and Lady is a rainicorn, so their offspring are a blend of dog and rainicorn and whatever Warren Ampersand contributed to Jake's genetics. The children come out in a range of forms, some looking more like puppies, some more like rainicorns, and each is a distinct individual with a distinct life. There is Kim Kil-wan, who grows into a stern, business-minded adult, and at one point becomes, in a role reversal that stings, a kind of landlord and disciplinarian to his own father Jake. There is Charlie, there is Viola, there is TV, who is exactly the layabout the name suggests, and there is Jake Jr. They speak with varying degrees of their mother's language and their father's, and they grow up and move on with their lives at the accelerated pace we talked about with Jake's aging, so that Jake experiences the full arc of fatherhood, from pups to grown children to grandchildren, while Finn is still a teenager. Watching Jake be a young dad, then an absent-ish one, then a grandfather figure, is one of the show's most human long arcs, and it all rests on the quiet fact that his partner is a color-changing light-swimming creature from another dimension who speaks a language he only partly understands. There is a descendant of this line who matters enormously to the ending, and I will only plant her here rather than pay her off, because her real weight belongs to the finale. Far in the future, 1,000 years on from the present, one of the new heroes of that era is a character named Beth, and Beth is widely read as a descendant of Jake and Lady Rainicorn, carrying their line forward into a world neither of them lived to see. So the union of a Boyle-born alien dog and a light-flying Korean-speaking rainbow unicorn does not just give the show its most tender domestic subplot, it seeds one of the two children who inherit the entire world at the end of time. The family Jake and Lady built outlasts almost everything, threading down through 1,000 years to put one of their own at the center of the far future. Not bad for a couple most viewers remember, mainly for the fact that half of them was always speaking a language the other half could not follow. What I take from Lady and the Rainicorns, on interpretation, is how comfortable the series is with the unknowable inside a loving relationship. Adventure Time could have translated Lady fully, could have made her transparent, could have collapsed the distance between her and the audience. It chose not to. It let Jake love someone he could not entirely understand, and it treated that not as a problem to be solved, but as a normal and even beautiful condition of loving another person. You do not get all of anyone. There is always a crystal dimension they came from that you have never seen, a language they think in that you do not speak, a boyfriend named Lee you will never really know the story of. Jake loves Lady across that gap and builds a whole sprawling family across it, and the show suggests the gap was never the obstacle. It was just the truth about what it means to love someone who is truly other than you. And in a series obsessed with connection across impossible distances, a dog and a rainbow, a human and a candy queen, a man and the fiancé he can no longer remember, Lady Rainicorn is the gentlest version of the lesson. Love does not require full understanding. It only requires that you keep showing up in the light. Fern is one of the saddest characters the series ever made, and his tragedy is entirely a tragedy of identity, of a being cursed to know that he is a copy of someone else and to hate himself for it. To understand Fern, you have to follow a chain of magical objects that starts with a cursed sword, so let me walk it, because the mechanics are strange and the emotional payoff is worth the setup. It begins with the grass sword, a blade Finn acquires that carries a curse, a living grass demon bound into the weapon that will not let go of the arm that wields it. Finn carries this cursed grass blade for a long stretch of the series. Separately, Finn comes to possess the Finn sword, and here is the piece that sounds absurd and turns out to be crucial. Living inside the Finn sword is a tiny sentient Finn, a small conscious version of Finn himself, a fragment of self somehow housed within the blade. So you have two magical swords, one carrying a grass curse and one carrying a miniature living Finn. And when these two swords fuse together, when the cursed grass sword and the Finn sword merge, the result is a new being. The grass curse and the little sword Finn combine and grow into a person, a grass-made duplicate of Finn, and that duplicate is Fern. He is sometimes called Grass Finn, and he is, at his root, Finn's own goodness and Finn's own curse, grown together into an independent living thing. Fern's whole existence is poisoned from the start by what he is. He has Finn's memories, Finn's feelings, Finn's sense of himself as the hero of the story, and then he has to live with the unbearable fact that he is not the real Finn. He is the copy. He is the grass one. Everyone who looks at him sees the original standing right there, whole and human and beloved, and Fern is the botanical echo, the version that came second and came wrong. And the corruption of the grass curse works on that wound, feeding his envy, turning his anguish into aggression, until Fern decides that the only way to be the real Finn is to replace him, to remove the original and take his place. He turns antagonist, driven by a grief that is really self-hatred, an identity that cannot forgive itself for being a duplicate. It is an uncomfortable arc to watch, because Fern is not evil in any clean sense. He is Finn's own psyche, split off and told it does not count, lashing out at the person whose face it wears. The tragedy resolves the way these things tend to in Adventure Time, with a mercy that arrives too late to be a rescue. Fern is eventually freed of the grass curse, the corrupting influence stripped away, and in that freedom he is finally himself, no longer driven by the demon's envy. But being freed of the grass is also the end of him, because the grass was holding him together. Without the curse, Fern deteriorates. He falls apart, his grass body failing, and he dies. At peace at last, but only in the act of ending, and what he leaves behind is a seed, a small seed shaped like the Finn sword, the last remainder of everything he was. Finn takes that seed and plants it, and out of the ground grows a tree, and the tree bears a new Finn sword. So Fern's death is not quite an ending. The copy who could not bear to be a copy becomes, in death, a source, a root, something the real Finn can grow a future from. The being made of Finn's discarded goodness gives back a sword grown from his own body, and the cycle of these blades continues. Curse into copy into seed into tree into sword. On interpretation, I think Fern is the series' clearest meditation on self-loathing, on the part of a person that looks at itself and sees only the flawed copy of who it was supposed to be. Finn spends the series growing up, becoming a fuller and better person, and Fern is what happens when a piece of that growth gets externalized and denied its own legitimacy. Fern is every harsh thing a person believes about themselves given a body and a sword and told to go live with it. And the reason his death lands so hard is that the writing never lets you write him off as a villain. He is Finn. He is the Finn who did not get to be the real one, and his whole rampage is the sound of a person who cannot accept that they are allowed to exist on their own terms. When Finn plants the seed at the end, it reads as Finn making peace with that rejected part of himself, giving it ground to grow in, letting the copy become something living rather than something to be defeated. You cannot kill the part of yourself that hates yourself, but the show suggests, through Fern, that you might be able to plant it, to let it turn into something that feeds you rather than fights you. That is a strange and gentle thing for a cartoon to say about the war people wage inside their own heads, and it is exactly the kind of thing Adventure Time slips in while you think you are watching an episode about magic swords. There is a motif that runs through Adventure Time so consistently that once you notice it, you start to feel like the universe of the show is trying to tell you something, and it is this. Finn keeps losing his arm. Across timelines, across dreams, across past lives, in reality and out of it, the same wound keeps happening to the same boy in 100 different forms, and the series treats it less like a coincidence than like a scar the cosmos itself carries. Let me lay out the past lives first, because that is where a lot of this lives. There is an episode centered on an object called the Vault, and through it you learn that Finn has had many past lives, that his soul has come around before wearing other faces. The one the series develops most fully is a girl named Shoko. Shoko lived hundreds of years before the series, an orphaned thief with one arm, missing the other, who came into the Candy Kingdom and befriended Princess Bubblegum, and the friendship was real, and then Shoko betrayed her, an act she came to regret, and the whole sad arc of it echoes forward into the present, because it helps explain the pull Finn feels toward Bubblegum, a connection older than his current life. And this is the detail that ties it into the pattern. Shoko had one arm. Finn's past life was already missing the very limb Finn will lose. In her own telling, her parents had sold that arm for a computer and abandoned her at a dojo, which is a bleak little detail even by the standards of this show, and it deepens the rhyme, because the loss was written into Finn's oldest self by the people who should have kept it from happening. Shoko even had a companion, a tiger, and fans often read that tiger as one of Jake's past lives, the idea being that Finn and Jake have found each other before, across incarnations, the boy and his animal, again and again down the ages, though the show never spells the tiger connection out. Now the arm itself. In the main timeline, Finn does lose his arm, and it regrows in strange ways tied to the grass curse and the swords we just discussed. But the truly eerie thing is how many other versions of Finn lose it too. In Farmworld, the alternate reality created by the wish that unmade the Lich, Finn loses an arm. In a dream sequence sometimes called Pillow World, an entire life Finn lives inside a dream, he loses it. In the nightmare orchestrated by the entity King Worm, it happens again. And there is Shoko, centuries back, already one-armed. The same loss, over and over, in the waking world, and the dreaming one, and the might-have-been one, and the long-ago one. The show never fully explains it, and I think it is right not to. It functions as a kind of cosmic signature, a mark that follows Finn's soul through every version of itself, as if losing the arm is simply part of what it means to be Finn, in any world, in any life. Some fans read it as the price of being the hero, the recurring sacrifice the universe extracts from whoever carries that spirit, and I like that reading. Though the writers leave it open, the pattern just recurs, patient and unexplained. One of those things that makes the whole show feel authored by something larger than the people writing it. The multiverse is the stage all this plays out on, and we have already walked through its machinery, Prismo and the Wishes and Farmworld, so I will not re-explain the mechanics. What I want to add here is the sense of scale it gives Finn's story. Because once you know there are other timelines, other Finns, past lives and future ones, the boy stops being just a boy and becomes a recurring figure, a role the cosmos keeps casting, and the show makes this explicit at the very end by showing you the next one. 1,000 years on from the series' present, in the far future, there is a new pair of heroes, and one of them is named Shermie. The finale strongly implies Shermie is Finn's spirit come around again, a small new hero in a world that has forgotten the old one, though it keeps that deliberately open rather than stating it outright. And his companion is Beth, widely read as a descendant of Jake and Lady Rainicorn, the family we planted earlier. So the pattern seems to complete itself. Finn and Jake were Shoko and her tiger in the past, by the reading the show invites. They are Finn and Jake in the present. And the ending suggests they come around once more as Shermie and Beth in the future. A boy hero and his animal friend. The same bond wearing new bodies down the long timeline. The finale uses this beautifully, and I will only touch it here because it belongs more fully to the ending. Shermie and Beth, in that far future, find Finn's old mechanical arm lying in the grass, a relic of a hero they have never heard of, and their search to understand it is what frames the whole finale. So the recurring lost arm, the motif that has haunted Finn across every timeline, becomes the literal artifact that carries his legend into the next age. The wound is the inheritance. The thing Finn kept losing is the thing the future finds and follows back to him. There is something painfully fitting about that. The most repeated injury in the whole series turns out to be the relic that keeps his memory alive 1,000 years on, so that the arm Finn could never keep is the one part of him that outlasts everything. On interpretation, the past lives material is the series' way of taking its central theme, that everything ends but connection recurs, and writing it into the very structure of reality. People die in Adventure Time. Jake dies. Everyone soft and mortal dies. But Adventure Time refuses pure loss, because it keeps showing you the same souls coming back around, the same friendships reforming across centuries, the same boy and the same dog finding each other again in the past and the future as surely as in the present. It is not quite comfort, and it is not quite tragedy. It is the story saying that the specific person you love will end, and that the shape of that love is somehow woven into the world deeply enough to keep recurring. That Finn will keep being Finn, and keep finding his Jake no matter how many times the timeline turns over. Whether that is a consolation or a kind of beautiful sorrow is left, as so much in this series is, for you to decide. After the main series ended, the story of Ooo did not stop, and the 4 specials that make up Distant Lands are where a lot of the deepest and most emotionally advanced lore lives. So let me walk through them, because they answer questions the series left open, and they deepen characters the finale had to move past quickly. They arrived a couple of years after the finale, released across roughly a year, and each one takes a single corner of the world and sits in it long enough to find something new. The first is simply called BMO, and it takes the little robot we have already spent time with and sends BMO off the planet entirely, into a science fiction adventure aboard a space station, where BMO becomes tangled up with a small rabbit-like being named Y5 and a whole cast of stranded travelers. It is playful and strange, but underneath the space opera it is doing what BMO stories always do, asking what it means for a machine to have a soul, to choose kindness, to be a hero, not because of programming, but because of the something more that Mo built in. It expands BMO's world without ever losing the thread that BMO is, at heart, the small one made to be more, and it plants the far future frame in which BMO eventually becomes king. The second special, Obsidian, is the one a lot of fans had waited years to see, because it belongs to Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, and it takes place after the finale, when the two of them are together, a settled couple living in domestic comfort. That alone is worth pausing on. The show spent its entire run building toward Marceline and Bubblegum, and the specials get to simply live in the aftermath of it, to show them as a real pair with a real relationship, comfortable and bickering and in love. Obsidian sends them back to the Glass Kingdom to face an old foe and, more importantly, to face their own rocky history, the years of hurt and distance and near misses that came before they finally found each other. A young bookworm named Glassboy pulls Marceline into the adventure, and the special uses Marceline's music, her songs, as the emotional engine, letting her work through the past with Bubblegum in a way the tight running time of the main series never allowed. If the show earned the couple, Obsidian is where it gets to enjoy them, and where it does the harder work of showing that getting together was not the end of the difficulty, only the beginning of the real relationship. The third special is called Together Again, and it is the one that will break you, so consider yourself gently warned. It reunites Finn and Jake, but it is set after Jake has died. Jake, who ages faster than Finn, who we watched become a father and a grandfather, has reached the end of his life, and Together Again is about Finn and Jake reconnecting in the afterlife, in the dead worlds, across the boundary that usually keeps the living from the ones they have lost. It is the show making good on its long, patient relationship with mortality, refusing to pretend Jake could live forever, and also refusing to let death be the last word on the greatest friendship in the series. To watch these two find each other again beyond the end of a life, after everything, after the whole run, is almost too much, and it is exactly the kind of thing Adventure Time earned the right to do by being honest about death for 10 seasons first. The title is a promise and a comfort, Together Again. Even death, is not the end of them. The fourth special, Wizard City, we have already touched, because it is Peppermint Butler's story, restarting the Dark One at Wizard School, and forcing him to reckon with his checkered, destructive past as he tries to prove his innocence and walk a straighter path. Coming last, it functions almost as a coda about redemption, about whether a being with real darkness in its history can begin again, which rhymes with the larger arcs of Simon and the Lich, and everyone else in this world who was given the chance to become something other than their worst chapter. Placed at the end of distant lands, it makes the case, gently, that the door to change stays open even for the deeply broken, which is a fitting last note for a franchise this preoccupied with whether people can be more than the sum of the harm in their past. Taken together, the 4 specials are the show growing up alongside its audience. The main series was, for all its depth, a children's adventure show. The specials are made for the people who were children when it started and are adults now, and you can feel it in what they are willing to sit with. A settled queer relationship working through old wounds, the death of a beloved character and the reunion beyond it, a robot's search for meaning, a villain's slow attempt at redemption. There is no rush in them, no obligation to resolve a monster of the week by the end of the half hour. They are the long, quiet conversations you have with a story after you have both grown older. And they set the table for the next chapter of the franchise, because one of them, in its far future framing and its interest in what happens to Simon after the crown, points directly toward the strangest and most metafictional corner of the whole saga, the world hidden inside the Ice King's mind, which is the door we open now. To understand Fionna and Cake, the spin-off series that arrived in 2023, you have to go back to something the Ice King used to do in the original show, because the whole thing grows out of a gag that turned out to be load-bearing. Back when he was still the Ice King, Simon wrote fan fiction. He wrote stories about gender-swapped versions of the Land of Oo's heroes, a human girl named Fionna in place of Finn, and a cat named Cake in place of Jake, and these were presented as episodes framed as the Ice King's own amateur tales, silly, sweet, a lonely man imagining a world. For years, that is all Fionna and Cake were, a recurring bit, the Ice King's imaginary friends. And then the franchise did something audacious with them. It made them real. Here is the setup, and it ties directly into the cosmic machinery we built earlier with Prismo, so it will click if you kept him in your pocket. The Fionna and Cake series is set after the events of the finale, which means after Simon has been cured. Simon is no longer the Ice King. The crown is gone, the curse lifted, and he is living as a man again, which sounds like a happy ending, and turns out to be its own kind of grief, because Simon, restored, is haunted, unmoored, carrying 1,000 years of memory as the Ice King, and unsure who he is without the madness that filled all that time. That is the emotional center of the show, Simon after the cure, a man trying to figure out how to live now that the thing that defined and destroyed him is finally gone. The lore engine underneath it is Prismo. It turns out that Prismo, the Wishmaster, grew bored and disillusioned with his job, tired of granting wishes forever, and in that boredom, he did something he was not supposed to do. He secretly created a rogue universe, an unauthorized world of his own making, and to hide it from the cosmic powers that police such things, he tucked it away somewhere no one would look, inside the mind of the Ice King. That hidden universe is Fionna and Cake's world. This reframes the entire original gag. The Ice King's fanfiction was not just the daydreams of a lonely man. It was Simon's mind unconsciously perceiving a real universe that Prismo had planted inside his own head, leaking out as stories he thought he was inventing. Fionna and Cake were real all along, living in a world hidden in the folds of the Ice King's broken mind, and his stories about them were the truth bleeding through. And this is the catastrophe the new show is built on. When Simon was cured, when the crown was removed and the Ice King ceased to exist, the universe hidden inside that mind lost the thing sustaining it. Fionna and Cake's world had magic only because it lived inside the magical mind of the Ice King. Cure Simon, and you drain the magic out of their reality. So the spin-off opens with Fionna and Cake living in a version of their world that has become mundane, ordinary, magic-drained, the wonder leaking out of everything as the source that fed it disappears. Fionna feels it as a wrongness she cannot name, a sense that her life is smaller and grayer than it should be, and the plot is set in motion by the need to save a dying universe that most of its inhabitants do not even know is dying. The antagonist is a clever piece of cosmic bureaucracy called the Scarab, a kind of god auditor whose job is to hunt down and eliminate unauthorized universes, exactly the sort of illegal creation Prismo made. So Fionna and Cake's world is threatened from two directions at once, starved of magic by Simon's cure, and hunted by an enforcer who wants to erase it for existing without permission. And Simon becomes central to the rescue, because the way to restore that world's magic runs back through him, through the possibility of the crown, through the terrible question of whether Simon might have to become the Ice King again to save a universe of people who only exist because he was once cursed. That is an agonizing thing to put in front of a man who just spent 1,000 years being destroyed by that crown and finally got free of it, and it is exactly the kind of impossible moral knot this franchise loves to tie. I will hold back the specifics of how it resolves, partly because a second season arrived in 2025, and the details there are best verified fresh rather than assumed, and I would rather leave a door open than walk you through a room I cannot fully see. But the shape of what Fionna and Cake does is worth naming, because it is a remarkable move for a franchise to make. It takes its saddest character, gives him the mercy of a cure, and then refuses to let that be the end, insisting that being freed from your suffering does not automatically tell you how to live, that a man remade at the end of his story still has to figure out who he is in the morning. And it takes a throwaway gag, the Lonely Ice King's fanfiction, and reveals it as a real world with real stakes, so that even Simon's madness turns out to have been housing something true and worth saving. That is the franchise doing, one more time, the thing it always does. It goes back to the corner of the story everyone thought was just a joke, and it finds a whole universe hidden there, waiting for someone to take it seriously. And so we come to the end, the finale, an episode called Come Along With Me that aired in September of 2018 and ran about 44 minutes across 4 parts, and it is one of the boldest things the show ever attempted, because it tries to be an ending and a beginning at the same time, to close the whole story and to promise it will go on forever, and remarkably it manages both. It opens, as we have been building toward all night, 1,000 years in the future. 2 young heroes, Shermie and Beth, find a mechanical arm lying in the grass, an ancient relic, and they set out to learn whose it was. Their search leads them to King Bimo, the little robot now ruling a far future Ooo, immortal and gentle and full of memory, and it is Bimo who tells them, and tells us, the legend of Finn and Jake. So the entire finale is framed as a story being remembered, the whole series recast as a tale passed down 1,000 years, told by the one who outlived everyone to 2 children who represent the next turn of the same eternal souls. Before a single present-day scene plays, the show has already told you its thesis. This will end, and it will be remembered, and it will begin again. The present-day plot is the climax of the Gum War, the conflict we set up long ago when we talked about Bubblegum's manufactured family. Her uncle Gumbald, whom she had accidentally reduced to a harmless candy citizen years before, recovered his mind and his malice, and launched a war to take the Candy Kingdom from her. Armies gather, old grudges surface, and Ooo tips toward a brutal, pointless conflict between candy factions. And then, in the middle of this small and bitter war, the truly enormous thing happens. Betty's desperate reach for power, tangled up with Magic Man's history, tears open the way, and GOLB, the embodiment of chaos we discussed, descends into Ooo. Suddenly the war over a candy kingdom is nothing. The embodiment of entropy is here, corrupting and fusing the fighters into monsters, and there is no army and no weapon that can stand against a thing that unmakes order itself. So the enemies unite, because they have to. Bubblegum and Gumbald's forces, heroes and villains, everyone who was fighting a moment ago, turned together against the impossible thing in the sky. And the resolution comes not through force, but through the 2 acts of sacrifice and forgiveness we have already traced. Betty makes her final choice and merges with GOLB, becoming Betty, and in that fusion, she gains the power to set things right and to give Simon back his mind before she departs with the Chaos entity forever. And the Gum War itself ends not with a victory but with a forgiveness, as Bubblegum's Aunt Lolly, freed of her own dum-dum curse, turns the recovering Gumbald back into harmlessness, and then chooses to forgive Bubblegum for everything, ending the war her family started out of centuries of resentment. The 2 threads resolve in the same key. The cosmic horror is answered by a sacrifice of love, and the petty war is answered by a choice to forgive. Neither is one. Both are ended by someone giving something up. Let me lay out where everyone lands, because the finale is generous with closure in a way finales rarely are. Finn and Jake survive, their friendship intact, the center that held the whole show together holding to the last. Simon is cured, a man again after 1,000 years, freed of the crown, which sets up everything Fionna and Cake would later explore. Betty is gone as an individual, merged into Betty, the most bittersweet fate in the series, having saved the man she loved at the cost of herself. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline are together, and the story finally, after 10 seasons of building it with painful care, confirms it on screen with a kiss, making canon the relationship that had lived in subtext and songs and stolen glances for years. The Lich, long since reduced to the baby sweet pea and raised by tree trunks, appears in the closing montage grown into a large, gentle, heroic young person, carrying the night sword, the being born of our worst weapon, to end all life, now standing as a protector of it. Every arc we walk through tonight gets its final chord. And then the show does the thing that makes the ending perfect. It returns to the far future, to Shermie and Beth, who have heard the whole legend now, and it ends by mirroring its own opening. The very first thing the series ever showed you was Finn and Jake in a particular pose, the boy and his dog at the start of an adventure. The last thing the finale shows you is Shermie and Beth in that same pose, a new boy hero and his animal friend standing where Finn and Jake once stood, at the start of their own adventures 1,000 years on. The circle closes and opens in the same gesture. Finn and Jake are gone, in that far future, and Finn and Jake are right there, wearing new bodies, beginning again. The show ends by telling you that it never really ends, that the specific people you loved will pass, but the shape of them, the bond, the adventure, comes around forever. I think the reason the finale lands so hard, and the reason people who grew up with this show can still barely talk about it, is that it refuses both of the easy endings. It does not pretend nothing was lost, because Jake will die, Betty is gone, Simon's 1,000 years cannot be given back, a whole world ended in the Mushroom War before any of it began. And it does not collapse into despair, because it keeps showing you the recurrence, the forgiveness, the reunion beyond death, the souls coming back around. It holds grief and continuation in the same hand and refuses to let go of either. Come along with me, the closing song asks, to the end of the world and beyond. And that is exactly what the show spent 10 seasons doing, walking you gently to the end of one world, our world, the one that ended in the war, and then past it, into the strange, bright graveyard that grew up after, and showing you that even there, even at the end of everything, there was still kindness, still music, still a boy and his dog setting out into the morning. That is the whole show. That is what it was always about. Let me step out of the world for a while and talk about how this thing actually got made, because the real-world story of Adventure Time is almost as unlikely as anything in Ooo, and knowing it changes how you hear the whole series. It began as a short. In 2007, an animator named Pendleton Ward made a roughly 7-minute cartoon called Adventure Time, a rough, scrappy, gleeful little thing about a boy and a stretchy dog, and it was released into the world with no particular expectation attached to it. And it went viral in the way that early internet things went viral, passed around and loved for its strange energy, long before anyone thought of it as a franchise. That short is the seed of everything. Cartoon Network, seeing what it had done, eventually picked it up and developed it into a full series, and Adventure Time premiered on April 5, 2010, produced by Frederator Studios. What started as one person's odd little viral cartoon became a series that ran for the better part of a decade, and it ran a long way. 10 seasons, 283 episodes in the main series, before you even count the miniseries and the later spin-offs. The finale aired on September 3, 2018. more than 8 years after the premiere, which means a whole generation of viewers grew up inside it, started watching as children, and finished as teenagers or adults, aging alongside Finn as he grew from a small boy into a young man. That is a rare thing for a cartoon to get, the time to actually let its lead grow up, and Adventure Time used it. Finn ages across the series, his voice changes, his concerns mature. What began as simple Monster of the Week adventuring slowly became the sprawling, melancholy, deeply serialized thing we have spent tonight taking apart, and it earned that evolution one episode at a time. There is a creative shift in the show's history worth understanding, because you can feel it in the seasons if you know to look for it. Pendleton Ward, the creator, stepped back from running the series partway through its run, moving away from the day-to-day showrunner role, and Adam Muto took over and guided the series through its later, more ambitious, more emotionally intricate seasons and into its ending. This is not a scandal, and I do not want to frame it as one, because these transitions are normal in a long-running production, and the series stayed remarkably coherent across it. If anything, the later seasons under Muto are where a lot of the deepest lore we have discussed tonight was built out. The cosmology deepened, the backstories filled in, the whole thing gathered toward its ending. The point worth making is that Adventure Time was not the vision of a single unbroken hand. It was a collaboration that changed shape over the years, shepherded by different people at different stages, and the fact that it holds together as well as it does, that a world this dense and this consistent emerged from a production that long and that collaborative, is a real achievement of storytelling stewardship. What I find remarkable, looking at the production from the outside, is how much the crew got away with on a channel aimed at children. This is a show that opened on the aftermath of a nuclear apocalypse, that built its central comic villain out of dementia and grief, that told a patient decade-long love story between two women and made it canon, that killed beloved characters and followed them into the afterlife, that reduced the embodiment of pure evil to a baby and asked whether love could redeem it. None of that is standard children's programming, and the crew wove it in so gently, buried it so deep under the candy and the adventure, that children could watch happily on the surface, while the deeper material sat there waiting for them to grow into it. That is a deliberate craft, and it is why the series has the afterlife it has. People do not just remember Adventure Time fondly. They return to it as adults and find a second show underneath the one they watched as kids, and that second show turns out to be about loss and memory and mortality, and the long, strange business of loving people across impossible distances. The influence of it is hard to overstate, and I will keep this to what is plainly true rather than reaching for grand claims. Adventure Time changed the texture of animated television that came after it. The wave of emotionally serious, serialized, lore-rich cartoons that followed, shows willing to trust their young audiences with real feeling and real continuity, owes an enormous debt to the door Adventure Time pushed open. It proved that a cartoon could be silly and profound in the same breath, that whimsy and grief were not opposites, that you could build a fully realized world with rigorous internal rules and still fill it with nonsense and joy. A lot of the animation people love now exists in the space Adventure Time cleared. It was, in the truest sense, foundational, and it did it while looking like it was just goofing around, which is the most Adventure Time way imaginable to change an art form. So when you hear the series, hear all of that underneath it. A viral short made by one person in 2007, a network taking a chance, a creator who built the world and then handed it to others to finish, a crew smuggling an elegy for the end of the world onto a children's channel, one bright, strange, heartbreaking episode at a time, for the better part of a decade. The lore we have spent the night in did not fall from the sky fully formed. It was assembled, patiently, by a lot of people who cared more than the format required them to, and that care is the thing you are really responding to when the show gets you. Somebody meant it, all of it. That is why it holds. Before we move toward the close, I want to gather up the load-bearing rules of this world, the ones that fans and casual viewers get wrong most often. Because part of what makes Adventure Time's lore feel so solid is that it does have rules, hard ones, and the story respects them, even when respecting them costs it a happy ending. The whimsy sits on top of a rigorous machine, and the machine has doors that stay closed. Some things in Ooo cannot be undone, and knowing which ones is half of understanding the show. GOLB's erasure is one. When the chaos entity removes something from existence, it does not go to the land of the dead where it might be bargained back. It stops having been, and that is a different and final category. This is why Betty's fate is so devastating and so precise. She did not die into a place you could visit. She merged into GOLB and left, present and gone at once, past the reach of the ordinary rules that make death negotiable elsewhere in this world. Do not imagine there is a reality where Betty simply comes back around the way past lives do. The writers closed that door on purpose. The crown is another closed door. It is not a hat you can take off and be fine. Prolonged use erased Simon into the Ice King over 1,000 years, and the only things that ever lifted it were the total cancellation of magic by an anti-magic being, briefly, or the final cure that cost Betty everything to grant. And even the cure is not a clean win, because being freed of the crown meant being freed of its protection and its power, and it left Simon a haunted man who had to learn how to live all over again, which is the whole engine of the spin-off. The story never once treated the crown as reversible on easy terms, and it never split Simon and the Ice King into two separate people who could be neatly divorced. They were always one being at different stages of the same long illness. The magic system holds its line too. Power in Ooo is grown from madness and sadness. It is transferable, and curing a wizard's pain depowers them, which we saw play all the way out with Magic Man becoming Normal Man. That rule means there is no free lunch anywhere in the magic. Every great power you meet is standing on a wound, and if you heal the wound, you lose the power. The elementals hold their line, always four, always reincarnating, never permanently destroyable as a class. The Nightosphere amulet holds its line, corrupting anyone with goodness in them, safe only for someone already evil. Death holds its line, reversible but never for free, always at a cost, always a trade. Over and over the story sets a rule and then refuses to cheat it, and that refusal is exactly why the world feels real. A world where anything can be undone has no weight. Adventure Time gave its magic weight by making it obey. And then there are the doors the writers chose to leave open, the mysteries they deliberately never answered, and I love these as much as the rules. Where exactly Ooo sits on the real Earth, the series will not finally say, and the people who made it disagree about its very size. What GOLB actually wants is left blank on purpose, because the answer is that a thing which is pure chaos does not want, and to give it a goal would be to make it smaller and safer than it should be. The full map of the dead worlds, the layered cosmology of the afterlife the story gestures at, is never completely charted. The deepest history of the cosmic beings, GOLB and Prismo and the cosmic owl, and the four-faced Martian god, is sketched rather than filled, hinted at through fragments and fan-gathered lore rather than laid out. The story is confident enough to leave enormous questions standing, and I think that confidence is a huge part of why the lore has kept fans busy for years. A story that answers everything is finished the moment it ends. A story that leaves the right things open keeps going in the minds of the people who loved it, and Adventure Time left exactly the right things open. There is a discipline in that balance that I find admirable, the way the series is ironclad about its mechanics and airy about its horizons. It will tell you exactly how the crown works, and exactly what the amulet does to a good person, and exactly why a cured wizard loses their magic, the near rules, the ones that generate its tragedies. And it will refuse to tell you where the edge of the world is, or what chaos is thinking, or what lies at the bottom of death, the far horizons, the ones that generate its sense of wonder, rules up close, mystery in the distance. That is how you build a world that feels both trustworthy and infinite at the same time. And it is why you can spend a night like this one, pulling the lore apart and still feel, at the end, that there is more of it out there in the dark than you will ever quite reach. The map has solid ground under your feet and fog at every edge, and the show wanted it exactly that way. So carry both halves with you, the doors that are closed, Betty gone, the crown's price, the wound under every power, death's unpayable exceptions, the rules it honored even when honoring them broke your heart, and the doors left open, the unmapped edges, the unanswered enormities, the fog the story trusted you to sit with, rather than dispelling it for you. Between the two of them lives the whole strange, solid, endless feeling of the Land of Ooo, a place with real laws and no known borders, which is, when you think about it, not so different from the world outside your window. We know the rules up close, and the horizon keeps its secrets, and somehow, that is a deeply comforting arrangement. One of the quietest pleasures of knowing the deep lore is being able to see the power hierarchy of this world, the ladder of who could actually beat whom, because Adventure Time hides an enormous range of scale under its flat, friendly art style, and the little penguin waddling past in the background might be able to unmake the character standing next to it. So let me climb that ladder from the bottom, not to argue about fights, but because the sheer spread of it, from a boy with a sword to a being that predates order itself, is one of the loveliest things about how the world is built. Down at the human level you have Finn, and Finn matters far more than his power does, which is part of the point. He is a kid with a good heart and a blade in a world full of things that could erase him without effort, and the series never lets him win by being the strongest. He wins by being brave, by being kind, by refusing to quit, and his cosmic significance comes not from muscle, but from being the counterpart to the Lich, a comet-born spirit tilted toward protecting life. Next to him, Jake, whose alien shapeshifting makes him more physically versatile than Finn, but who is likewise nowhere near the top of the ladder. The heroes of the show are, deliberately, not its strongest beings. They are the small, mortal center that everything enormous swirls around. A rung up, you find the great magic users and ancient beings, and here the scale jumps hard. Marceline, 1,000 years old, demon and human and vampire, strong enough to have hunted her way to her powers one soul at a time. Princess Bubblegum, whose might is less physical than intellectual and elemental. The living candy, with centuries of science behind her. The wizards at the height of their misery-fueled power. Magic Man at his worst. Betty at her most unbound. Peppermint Butler on speaking terms with death. And the elementals, fire, ice, candy, slime. Forces that can warp whole regions to their temperament when they are fully awake. These are the beings who shape kingdoms, and any one of them outclasses Finn and Jake enormously, and yet they too are far from the top. Higher still are the cosmic players, and this is where the imagination of the show really opens out. The Lich, death and extinction given a body, powerful enough that beating him once was the crowning achievement of the greatest hero who ever lived, and freeing him again nearly ended all reality. Orgolorg, the fallen warlord crushed into Gunter, whose full power is held in check only by the weight of the planet sitting on him. Grob Gob Glob Grodd, the four-faced Martian god, a keeper of cosmic order strong enough to banish Orgolorg and Magic Man both. These are the beings who operate at the scale of worlds and comets, and to them the kingdoms of Ooo are small, and the heroes are smaller. And near the very top sits Prismo, and here the ladder gets strange, because Prismo's power is not force at all. He is a wishmaster who can rewrite reality itself, spin up whole alternate timelines, unmake the Lich from the root of existence, and he did all of that while being, remember, only the dream of a sleeping old man. He created an entire universe in his spare time and hid it in someone's head. Raw reality editing on that scale puts him above almost everything else in the show, and yet he is casual about it, a laid-back cosmic slacker, which is exactly the kind of joke this series loves, that one of the mightiest beings in all of existence is a chill pink guy projected on a wall who mostly wants to relax. At the summit, above even the reality editors, is GOLB, and GOLB is a different category entirely. GOLB does not edit reality, GOLB dissolves it. Chaos and entropy given form, older than order, able to erase beings so completely that they were never there. Nothing in the show can defeat GOLB by force, which is the whole reason the finale had to be won by sacrifice instead of victory. When you put GOLB at the top of the ladder, you understand the shape of the whole cosmology. At the bottom, a mortal boy who wins with courage. At the top, the embodiment of the void that courage cannot touch, and every rung between them occupied by something the flat, friendly art style would never lead you to suspect. Tragic wizards and fallen warlords and dreaming wish gods and a penguin holding back the weight of a world. And there is one more figure who sits oddly on this ladder. Hard to place because his power is not force or magic or reality editing at all, and that is Bimo. On any measure of might, the little robot ranks near the bottom, weaker than half the princesses, unable to throw a punch that would trouble anything on the higher rungs. And yet Bimo is the one who ends up outlasting every being we just climbed past, still here 1,000 years on when the elementals have reincarnated into strangers, and the wizards are dust, and even Marceline's long life has run its course. Bimo's power is simply endurance, the plain immortality of a well-made machine, and it turns out that endurance beats might over a long enough span. The strongest thing in the room is rarely the thing that is still in the room at the end. What is still there at the end is the small patient one, who was built to be more, keeping the memory of everyone who was stronger. If the ladder measures who could win a fight, BMO barely registers. If it measures who is left to tell the story, BMO is at the very top, above GOLB and Prismo and all of them. Because the story is the only victory that lasts. What I love about laying it out this way is how it reframes the smallness of the heroes into the whole moral point of the series. Finn and Jake are not powerful. They are near the bottom of a ladder that reaches up into things that could end them with a thought. And the argument it makes over 10 seasons is that this does not matter, that the small mortal things at the base of the ladder, courage and kindness and loyalty and love, are the only forces that ever actually resolve anything. All the way up. GOLB is not defeated by a bigger GOLB. It is answered by Betty's love for Simon. The Lich is not outpowered. He is outloved, raised as a child by tree trunks. The whole towering hierarchy of cosmic might, all those enormous beings on all those high rungs, turns out to be beside the point. Because in the end, the things that save the world are the things a kid with a sword already had. The ladder is huge, and it climbs the ladder only to tell you that the bottom rung was where the real power lived the entire time. So here we are, at the end of the night and the end of the world and 1,000 years past it, which is exactly where this show always liked to leave you. Somewhere between grief and mourning. We started with a photograph that survived the apocalypse and a man who would forget his own name, and we have walked all the way out to 2 children in the far future, finding an old arm in the grass and wanting to know whose it was. And in between we found what almost nobody finds when they first meet Adventure Time, as a silly cartoon about a boy and his dog. We found a buried world, our world, ended and grown over and made strange and bright, populated by tragedies wearing the costumes of jokes, a lonely archaeologist under a crown, a warlord under a penguin, a devil raised into a gentle child, a dream that could rewrite reality, a love that paid everything and got exactly what it wanted and lost itself doing it. I think the reason Adventure Time stays with people the way it does, the reason grown adults get quiet when it comes up, is that it never lied to them about the one thing children's stories usually lie about, which is that things end. Jake ends. Betty ends. Simon's 1,000 years cannot be given back, and a whole civilization ended in fire before the first episode even started. The show looked all of that dead in the eye on a channel for kids, and it did not flinch, and it did not despair either. It kept setting rules it refused to cheat, and leaving mysteries it refused to solve. And it kept insisting, underneath the candy and the swords, that the small mortal things, kindness and loyalty and showing up in the light for someone you cannot fully understand, are the only forces that ever really matter, all the way up the ladder past the gods and the chaos and the end of everything. That is a radical thing to teach a child, and an even harder thing to remind an adult. And Adventure Time did both while looking like it was just goofing around. And it left you with that last image on purpose. The 2 future kids in the pose the first 2 struck in the very first second of the series, the circle closing and opening in the same breath. Everyone you love will pass, it says, and the shape of them comes around again, and there will always be a new small brave thing setting out into a new morning in a world that forgot the last one. It is not quite a comfort, and it is not quite a sorrow. It is the truest thing the show knew how to say, and it said it gently, so that you could take it in at whatever age you happen to be watching, and grow into the rest of it later, the way you have maybe been growing into it tonight. So let that be the thing you carry down into sleep. The world ends, and something kind grows out of the grave, and the same souls keep finding each other across every distance the universe can put between them, in the past and the present and 1,000 years from now. The Land of Ooo is just our own world, changed past recognition and loved anyway, which is, when it comes down to it, the only thing any of us can really hope to do with a world. Love it anyway. Rest easy. The story keeps going without you for a while, and it will still be here when you wake. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.